Enae, Human Station, Treaty Administration Facility. Everything here is very rad to eye, said Miss Yedes, the treaty advocate, handing Istvetluid a tumbler of coffee. They sat in hard, straight-back chairs, crowded into a tiny room that was the advocate's office. Here on the human station anyway, and definitely on Central, the station where most of the interspecies business gets done. You'll want gloves if you haven't got some already. Enae, like everyone else in the office, Miss Sluid, Miss Yedes herself, was barehanded. "We brought gloves," said Edgemont Sluid brusquely, disapprovingly, "but we didn't think—" "No, of course not," said the advocate, "but just so you know, you'll be needing them, and soon. Also," she grimaced, "you won't find much decent coffee here. You may as well learn to appreciate tea." Edgemon, somewhat placated, Enae was glad to see, gave a short laugh. "So we found—" "I imagine so," replied Miss Yedes, settling into her chair. "Now to business. This is going to be a delicate matter. There has been any number of cases of people choosing an affiliation under the treaty, but none has been contested for a good 300 years. She waved a hand. Contested on the treaty level, I mean. "Is that case from 300 years ago relevant to ours?" asked Enae, hopefully. She took a sip of her own coffee. Far too sweet. Zayaseni had a very different idea of good coffee than Enae did, but at least it was not the watery, faintly burnt-tasting stuff they'd been served at the accommodation that morning. "In some ways it's a very similar case," said Niziedes. "A question of an orphan taken in by people at the nearest station." Istvetluid sat up straighter in her chair. "How did that come out?" "The committee decided that the orphan in question absolutely had the right to choose their affiliation, and that they would have to give up any claims based on the rejected one. It was a question of inheritance on both sides, you see." "Well then, that's very simple," exclaimed Edgemon. "The choice ought to be Reet's anyway." "Not so simple as all that," cautioned the advocate. "Treaty law isn't based on precedent," said Enae. She had been reading in the weeks it took to get here. "And the person who should be making our case to the committee is Ambassador Saymet herself, who is determined to turn Reet over to the Presger." "That, yes," agreed the advocate. "And moreover, there has never been a case like this involving a Presger translator. No one has ever decided they don't want to be one, let alone the other way around." "This fugitive," suggested Enae, with a feeling that somehow some detail had kicked into place, but he couldn't quite see what or where. "The person who ran away 200 years ago? If they belonged anywhere else, if they had been Gek or they wouldn't have needed to run away. They could have petitioned to change affiliation, and maybe they would have found a way to make that work. And we'll point that out, to be sure. And technically speaking, that should be enough. The treaty makes no explicit exception for Presger translators, but there is a very definite unofficial exception. Presger translators are different. They're not just humans who maybe have spent some time with aliens." "Different? In what way?" asked Istver. Miss Yedes waved helplessly. "It's just something everyone here knows. And more to the point in our particular case, it's regulation, here on the human side of the treaty facility, that any human who sets foot on the Presger part of the facility is to be considered officially dead, and certainly no longer human." "What?" Enae was appalled. "It's never happened that I know of," said Miss Yedes. "Not since the treaty has been in force, and it's not treaty law. It's policy that originates in the ambassador's office." "Maybe we can turn that to our advantage, though?" Enae suggested. "If Ambassador Saymet turns Reet over to the Presger translators, and he's considered dead, then he's unaffiliated with anyone and can choose, right? Wasn't there a case like that?" She searched her memory. "By lad Budrikim, right? He was declared dead for some reason but was still alive, and he successfully petitioned to be accepted as Gek. Yes, the advocate agreed. It was quite recent, too, but it didn't involve the Presger translators, and the reason a person could be considered dead after visiting the Presger, according to widely and firmly held belief here, is that the Presgers themselves would have eaten them, or disassembled them or whatever, and anyone returning would only be a copy. Silence. Enae opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. It's something the Presger did, or tried to do, before the treaty, and there are at least rumors that the Presger translators, well, that they absorbed humans they came across in some way. It's not supposed to happen anymore. It would be a violation of the treaty, but still, no one wants it to happen. Ridiculous, said Etchemin finally. Absurd. We can't let them hand Reet over to the Presger, said Istra, more calmly than Enae could believe was real. How do we prevent it? We might not be able to, warned the advocate. She's already on his way, in the custody of Ambassador Saymet, who I have no doubt intends to hand Mr. Truide over to the Presger as soon as she possibly can. Fortunately, we received word just this morning that the committee will hear our petition. We leave for Central tonight. But how? Asked Enae, bewildered. Ah, said the advocate, pleased, almost smug. In theory, you see, the various parties to the treaty communicate through their respective ambassadors. In reality, though, those ambassadors have staff who do much of that work, and those staff members work with other parties and so on, and we all work here at the facility. It would be strange if we never got to know anyone else. Who brought this to the committee, then? Asked Istver. The Gek, oddly enough, said Nisiedes. They're not usually even here, not in person, but for things like a new applicant to the treaty, well, long distance won't do. The case where someone officially dead wanted to change affiliation, said Enae. That involved the Gek. Indeed it did, Nisiedes agreed. The Gek representatives are most sympathetic, as are the representatives of the Republic of Two Systems, though of course they can't give us any official assistance. The machines? Etchement Fluid seemed horrified. Oh, you wouldn't know it talking to them, said Naziedes, and they'd be most obliging in this case in particular. They kill people and take over their bodies, Etchemin insisted. That's how they seem so human to you. They won't be able to do that if they're treaty members, Enae pointed out. Isn't that right? She appealed to the advocate. I can't say that will never happen, said Maziedes, but I can see that it's already settled law in the Republic that only volunteers may be made into ancillaries. Volunteers? Istre's tone was uncharacteristically contemptuous, skeptical. Who would actually volunteer for such a thing? They've had a number of applicants already, I understand, replied Maziedes, though not, I think, any accepted so far. But the point is, the Republic is particularly interested in freedom of affiliation being enforced, not surprising at all when you think about it. And while their support doesn't count officially, yet, if ever, it does count. What about the asked Enae. The Ms. Yedes paused a moment thinking. The question of handing someone over unwilling is complicated for them. You may remember when they first joined the treaty. That Rajai soldier, exclaimed Etchemin. She refused to kill the when the Rajai first encountered them. And then, said Miss Yedes, when the Rajai demanded she be turned over for execution, it was mutiny after all, the complied. Etchemin made a disgusted noise. and Mercedes said, "It was a difficult situation, and none of us were there to know everything that happened, but the delegates themselves are divided over it. It's possible we can exploit that, or try to. I think it will be a protracted argument. I must warn you, it may be days, even weeks, before any hearing actually begins." Etchemin cried, "And in the meantime they can do whatever they like to Reet?" "Maybe," said the advocate calmly. "But the moment the committee accepted our petition and placed it on the agenda, that is, about an hour ago, all other actions regarding the subject, Mr. Treed, were suspended. So, as a matter of treaty law, they can't do anything to your son besides house and feed him." "And eat him, and send us back a copy," said Istra, her composure cracking just slightly for the first time. "Well, that's what happens to humans, supposedly," said Mercedes. "But Mr. Freed is a Presger translator, biologically, I mean." That, thought Enae, might mean he was in more danger. But he didn't speak that thought aloud. Ms. and McSreed didn't need to hear it. "We are going to do everything we possibly can." Mercedes lifted her tumbler of coffee. "Enjoy this while you can. There isn't even bad coffee on Central. It'll be tea from here on out." Mercedes's office on Central was much larger and more comfortable than on the human station. The chairs were cushioned with dark blue velvet. There was room for a wide, low table, and the walls were a cheerful pale yellow, though Enae could see, faintly, the shapes of the 4 emanations that the paint had covered. They met first with a long, attenuated person in a mobility seat. "Theat Hadarat Betonen," said Mercedes. Theat Hadarat Betonen had, Enae thought, the longest arms of anyone she had ever seen, but then she realized she was low-G adapted. "Call me Betonen," she said, and from somewhere in her mobility chair she drew a box, opened it into a wide section tray, filled with small bits of something delicious from the smell. Mercedes uncovered her own offering, tiny iced cakes. "Oh, I hoped you would have those," said Betonen. "Betonen is a treaty jurist from the Hussevin Association," said Mercedes. "There's a collection of stations in a system very far from here," said Betonen, "but we still are concerned with things like the treaty with the Presger." Mercedes said, "Betonen is also an assistant to Ceres, the human member of the committee we'll be dealing with." Betonen raised a tiny bowl of tea, held at the end of one long tentacle-like arm. "Can't let the Rajai decide everything for us, though they do try." "Indeed they do," agreed Mercedes. "This is where you might expect some small talk," said Betonen, "but we don't do small talk where I'm from." She took a sip of tea and pushed the box of delicious-smelling treats toward them. The green ones are particularly nice, much better than Scale." Anything would be better than Scale, the thick, fleshy leaves that were the only food available on Central. Allegedly, it provided every nutrient a human needed, but the taste was indescribable. Not bad, not good, just strange. Condiments helped, but Enae was already sick of it. "I'm with you," said Etchemin, taking a green titbit. "No waste of time. Down to business." Betonen showed her teeth in what seemed to Enae to be a very stiff imitation of a smile. "I like you," she said. "Yes, let's get down to business. The Hussevin Association, among many other collectives and individuals, are very interested in preventing the Rajai from defining human for the purposes of the treaty. Their definition being somewhat restrictive," suggested Isfa, taking a sweet for herself. "Oh, the green ones are delicious." "Yes, they are," agreed Betonen. And yes, the Rajai definition of human is far too restrictive for our taste. Before the treaty, we wouldn't have cared to call yourself what you like so long as you leave us alone. But the treaty. Yes, Enae agreed. The treaty changed so many things. Even, it seems, changed the Rajai, said Betonen, gracefully lifting a tiny pink cake from the tray Maziedes had set out. This business with their AIs. It's the end of the Raj if the treaty accepts them. Plenty of Rajai artificial intelligences are stationed. It's not like they can leave Rajai space, and they control the habitat of thousands, sometimes millions of Rajai citizens. If they're declared significant species, signatories to the treaty, the Rajai lose control over those stations. Not to mention the question of how many of their warships might desert. How long can the Raj keep control over their territory then? She gave a little shrug. Long overdue, if you ask me. Are you meeting with them? The AIs, yes, Miss Yedes answered. Every little bit, you know. Every little bit, agreed Betonen. Well, there are mixed feelings around Central about your case. On the one hand, no one wants the Rajai ambassador to be able to declare anyone's children inhuman and take them from their parents. On the other hand, we know very little about Presger translated juveniles, but we do know, or think we know, that they're dangerous. We want to be careful. He's our son, curse you! Cried Edgemin. Betonen waved the show of temper away, as though it had been an innocuous pleasantry. Tell me about him. Has he ever hurt anyone? He did have a problem with biting when he was very small, said Istva. It quite alarmed the minders at the play crash, who are used to all sorts of children, you know. One child did need some first aid, but that was the end of it, really. Reet could barely talk at the time, but I believe that when he realized that he'd actually hurt someone, he stopped. As good a hypothesis as any, said Betonen. And when he was older, he had, Istva hesitated. Once, a job counselor asked him what he dreamed of doing, and Enae thought she could barely bring herself to say whatever it was. Then Istra looked at Etcheman in mute appeal. He wanted to cut people open and eat them, said Etcheman brusquely. We thought he was just, you know, having a joke. Odd sort of joke, thought Enae. Did he ever cut anyone open, I mean? Asked Bretonen. Or eat anyone? Etchemin stood. How dare you? This is our son. Of course he is, said Betonen calmly. But before I speak favorably to my superior about this case, I want to be certain I am not unleashing something dangerous on you and your people. You know your son. I do not, and can't be expected to. So, I ask these questions. We've asked for records, Ms. Yetis said. From Zeusel, there is no sign of any mysterious disappearances or deaths that might be laid at Reet's door, and if there were even the remote possibility of such, they'd have been happy enough to pin it on him. So you know they looked hard for anything they could use. Fair enough, acknowledged Betonen, taking another tiny cake. There is, however, another issue. Mr. Swede had some sort of affiliation with an organization called the Siblings of Pt.2. Ms. Yedes seemed taken aback. You have been paying close attention to this case. Well, obviously, replied Betonen around the cake. She chewed and swallowed. But I don't need to have been paying much attention to know that. The siblings of Hikipu have attempted to file a petition with the committee. They have representatives on the way here. Mr. Nabkal, said Enae. Betonin gestured agreement. I've looked a bit into who the siblings of Hikipu are and seen their petition, and I have concerns. Ms. Yedes waved that away. The siblings of Hikipu is a sort of ethnic affiliation club, a way for immigrants and their children to help each other out and keep contact with their history. You know the sort of thing. She paused, then said with faint disapproval, I hope this isn't about assuming all Hikipi are drunken and violent. Is that the sort of thing they only assume about the Hikipi? But no, I'm concerned about their possible connection to the situation in Keroksen, and their petition is strange to say the least. They claim there is no actual evidence that Reet is anything but biologically human, and not only that, but that he's the heir to some office of a destroyed station. Obviously, the committee won't pay attention to such nonsense on its own, but they claim to be bringing their petition in support of yours. Or so I hear. Is this something you're associated with? No, Istvetluid said, firm and definite. I know that Reet was a member of the organization back on Rurusk, and he made some friends and even gotten a good job through them. I have no reason to think badly of them, but I don't understand why they're here. Reet's genetics have always seemed odd, and at the time a Hikipi origin seemed as likely as anything else, but much as I hate to see it, I do think Mix Aftur's identification of him is probably accurate. Too many things just seem to fit, and I've never. She stopped, apparently unable to continue. We've always encouraged our children to look into their origins, Etchemin said, insistent, as though someone had been arguing with them about the subject. We want them to know their histories. Fear in love, said Betonin, and turned to Ms. Yedes. Did you know these siblings of Ikipu were coming here? I didn't, admitted Ms. Yedes, and I didn't know they'd tried to file a petition. I don't like that they've done this behind our backs, said Istre. Ms. Yedes said, to be honest, I'm not entirely surprised at their actions. We can deal with them, though. This isn't Rurusk, where half the civil service has Hikipi cousins. They'll have a battle to fight, just establishing they've any grounds for entering this petition, and as far as landing here at Central, or addressing the committee in a hearing, well, we're certainly not going to help them. Ms. Yedes sighed. They'll be an annoyance, but we can deal with them. Reet. Ambassador Sayemit ship. Implacable discernment. The dreams didn't stop. Reet still woke with disturbing regularity in a sweat that clung to his bed covers and then dried into flakes, like flakes of skin. He wanted it. Oh, how he wanted it, worse now than when he was alone, all alone. He wanted to grab the first person he saw, taste their skin dissolving under his tongue. No, that wasn't right. Sometimes he paced the tiny compartment, smaller than the room they'd kept him in at the health facility on Rurusk, but far more comfortable. The walls were dark, grained like wood, with half a dozen niches and shelves, and there was a small table and chair, actual wood, Reet thought. The bed itself was a real bed, not a health facility cot, and the silky green and blue bed covers were soft and warm, and the food was amazing, strange, but delicious. Delicately spiced fish, noodles in some translucent tangy sauce, thin sliced vegetables, some he'd only ever heard of, cakes soaked in honey. These weren't a prisoner's rations. The food was so good that it could momentarily distract him from the fact that he was a prisoner, that he didn't know what he was really, that no one would help him, no one could. That sometimes what he wanted, what he needed, was to crawl through the wall of this room to dig free and then find someone, anyone, to take hold of and... But when he thought those thoughts, his skin broke out in a sheen of sticky sweat. And no, he didn't really want that. He wanted someone to want to melt with him into a puddle of goo? The thought made him catch his breath. Yes, that was what he wanted. More than anything, wanting to do that to someone who didn't want to, too. That was wrong. There were a lot of things wrong with him, Reet knew, but that wasn't one of them. "Are you all right, Mr. Reet?" asked a voice out of the air. A Ratchet-eye voice, but higher, maybe younger than the person who'd spoken to him before. He must have done something, made some sound. "Not really, no. I'm very sorry," said the voice. Definitely not the last person he talked to. "There's only so much we can do. I hope you understand." "I don't." "I'm sorry," said the voice again. "I can't really explain because I only know so much. But what's happening to you is quite normal for Presger translated juveniles." Juveniles? He thought, calculating, comparing calendars. "I'm 31 years old." A momentary silence then. "That's well within the normal range, Ambassador Saymet says." Reet wanted to curl up into a ball under those luxurious covers and scream. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, as straight as he could manage. "What's happening to me?" Another silence. Then, "Ambassador Saymet urges me to tell you that the fact this is happening is proof that you are, indeed, a Presger translator and not human." Ambassador Saymet can go fuck herself. Still in Ratchet-eye. At least he'd found some practical use for that vocabulary. "She can be very uncompromising sometimes," said the voice apologetically. "I'm Leckie, by the way." Reet didn't answer, just stared ahead at the wall in front of him. "You shouldn't worry. I don't think there's anything actually wrong with you. We don't know a lot about Presger translated juveniles. We never get to see any, but Ambassador Saymet thinks everything happening to you is probably perfectly normal, given the circumstances, given what she's been able to get out of translated Tla." Tears started, prickling. "One thing we do know is that they keep juveniles away from humans because they're dangerous. I know you wouldn't want to hurt anyone," Leckie continued, "but you might, whether you want to or not." A monster. He was a monster. "None of this is your fault," said Leckie. "I know you're unhappy and uncomfortable, but try to hang on. We have 8 more days of travel, and then you'll be with your Clade. They'll take care of you." "Take care of you?" Reet shivered. "What if I don't want to be with my Clade, whatever that is?" "I don't think you have a choice," said Leckie, her voice regretful. "Really, Mr. Reet, don't worry. Your Clade is one of the most influential right now, and they specifically asked us to bring you to them alive and uninjured. They want you back." That brought up so many complicated thoughts and feelings that Reet didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth, and, "Can I get some coffee instead of all this tea?" was what came out. There was no coffee. There were, though, Ratchet-eye entertainments and music, loaded onto a handheld that came with his next meal. Leckie had said she would try to find some material he'd be mostly able to follow. And she'd done a pretty good job. None of it was as satisfying as Pirate Exile's, but it was something, anyway. It was also something that someone would speak to him after he had been isolated for so long. He felt less cut adrift, knowing that Leckie's voice would sound when he was done with his lunch, and she would talk with him about the entertainments he'd been watching or advise him on Reet grammar. But she would not, no matter how much he asked, agree to let him send a message to his parents. All communications between humans and Presger translators have to be approved by Ambassador Saimet's office, she said. Well, this is the ambassador's ship, isn't it? Argued Reet. She's on board, right? She won't approve it. I said. Wait until you're settled with your Clade. My parents are probably worried about me. Oh, they're definitely worried about you, and it wouldn't surprise me if we were met with a stack of petitions on your behalf once we dock at Central. For some reason, that surprised Reet. There are jurists on the Treaty Administration Facility? I laughed. Sometimes it seems like there's nothing but jurists on the Treaty Administration Facility. And yes, your parents have hired one, and she's been working away on your behalf. Not that it will change much. You are what you are. You can't really help your biology, but maybe it helps to know your parents are out there doing what they can. They can't afford that, Reet protested. Really, Mr. Tweed? Try not to worry, said I. But there were tears in Reet's eyes again, and she didn't want to talk any more. On the last day of travel, I did not speak to him. Instead, it was Ambassador Saimet's voice that spoke out of the air. Reet, Freud. Reet considered what answer he wanted to make, and settled on silence. You already know, said the ambassador, that the Presger translators want you back, quite urgently. This is not because they care about you in particular. Reet rolled his eyes. I'd guessed that. A moment of silence, then. I am not trying to disillusion you. I am giving you a warning. The officials I spoke to were very solicitous of your well-being. They want you to come to them alive and healthy. They want something from you. There's nothing you can possibly have that would interest them except maybe information. I am not going to be silent. I am not a lie, and we have little time. It occurred to Reet to mention that they had both been on board this ship for a good 2 weeks, and she could have spoken to him at any point, but he held the words back. On the one hand, continued Ambassador Saimet, this is good for you. You'll likely be treated well and allowed to reach adulthood, but once they have what they want from you, or as I strongly suspect, they discover that you don't have what they're looking for, then your usefulness to them will be at an end. Reet leaned back against a cushion and closed his eyes. I want to talk to my parents. You have no parents, said Ambassador Saimet, voice cold and matter-of-fact. The sooner you realize this, the better. Better for who? Asked Reet. I don't agree to any of this. I have a right to talk to my jurist. Presger translators don't have jurists. Then I must not be a Presger translator. I demand to see my jurist, and I demand to be allowed to contact my parents. Impossible, replied Ambassador Saimet. You have neither. Reet sighed, opened his eyes, picked up his handheld, and started up episode 173 of Pirate Exiles of the Death Moons. It had lots of shooting, and alarms, and explosions, and he turned the external volume up as high as it would go. When the episode was done, his handheld pinged. A message from Ambassador Saimet. We dock in 20 minutes. Put on the isolation suit and you will walk off the ship with some shred of dignity. Or not. It doesn't matter to the ship's crew, one way or another. He replied, I expect to see my jurist when I disembark. The answer came back immediately. You may expect whatever you like, but I beg to inform you that you will be disappointed. 15 minutes. Reet considered. What would his parents advise him to do? Would he, by walking away from the ship under his own power, signal any sort of consent to any of this? Or if they carried him off unconscious, would he miss some opportunity? It wasn't Zaerseni law he was dealing with here. It was treaty law, and his conversations with Enae hadn't given him the information he needed for this situation, probably on purpose, he realized. And why hadn't Enae spoken to him just now? She would have been able to say the things Ambassador Saymet had just said without being so antagonistic. They wanted him angry, he concluded. They wanted him to decide to make them carry him out. He stowed both handhelds in his shirt and picked up the isolation suit. It was the right decision. He walked off the ship, clumsy in the isolation suit, escorted by two white-clad figures he assumed were Ambassador Saymet and Ann Leckie, who gave him a rueful smile and a tiny wave of one white-gloved hand, into a perfectly recognizable dock. And there, standing behind a row of temporary fencing, was a short, stout stranger. And beside her, Mom, and Nana, and Mix Astur. "Mom! Nana!" cried Reet, and moved toward them. Ambassador Saymet caught Reet's arm. "Don't, or you'll regret it." "I think you will," said Reet, trying to pull away. Off behind the fencing, Mom and Nana said something. Their mouths moved. They were shouting, but he couldn't hear them. He knocked his fist against the side of his helmet. The short, stout woman, a jurist Reet was sure, held something up and said something. "Oh, you have got to be shitting me," said Ambassador Saymet. And suddenly Reet could hear what everyone was saying. "Committee has granted a hold on these proceedings," the jurist was saying. "I'll say it a third time if you like." "Reet," called Nana. "Say you're human. You have to say it." "I'm human," said Reet. "You are most certainly not," said Ambassador Saymet. Beside her, Ann Leckie stood wide-eyed, and Reet couldn't tell if she was horrified or delighted. "Ambassador Saymet," called another voice. Another group approached, on this side of the fence, all of them in translator white. "Translator Dla," said Ambassador Saymet. "I apologize for this confusion." Translator Dla, Reet supposed, waved that away. "These things happen, Ambassador. We must allow the committee to do its work." Reet thought there was an edge of impatience in Translator Dla's words. The translator turned toward the jurist. "We acknowledge the hold, but we cannot and will not release this juvenile into your custody. The committee would never order us to hand them over to you. They won't." "He," said Reet. "I'm she." "Gender," said Translator Dla, "is a thing humans have." "Some humans," replied Reet, "and I'm one of them." Translator Dla looked suddenly as though they had a headache. "Come along now," they said, beckoning. "I suppose we'll have to explain things to you too." "Reet," called Mom. "Hold on. We're doing everything we can." "I wasn't disappointed after all," said Reet to Ambassador Saymet. "Maybe it's you who has a disappointment coming." "Don't depend on it," said Ambassador Saymet, her voice acid. Qven. Presger Station, Treaty Administration Facility. It was a while before they took me to watch Sam die. I don't know how long. I didn't count how many times I lay in the very large bed, or the number of cakes I ate, or how many cups of tea I drank. Long enough, though, for me to begin to wonder if they would show me at all. If maybe, contrary to their expectations, Sam had not begun to die. Long enough for me to remind myself that I shouldn't pin any hopes on that. The teacher had very specifically said that Sam's death would be a long one. Long enough that I began to see doors. At first, I didn't know what they were. It was just a strange feeling around particular stretches of wall. I knew better than to look more closely. Teacher was always near me, and though they seemed to have been kind to me, I knew I would be foolish to depend on that for anything serious. I had to be discreet, to sit quietly, to seem as though all my attention was on a sprouting radish or the leaf of a potato plant. The tiny nascent tubers under the soil, piping their smooth, waxy little songs. This was, of course, precisely the behaviour teacher had encouraged, and they were pleased, I thought, to see me settle now, even more profoundly than I had before. He didn't leave me alone exactly. They were always with me no matter what I did, but they declined to interrupt me when I was quietly occupied. I could feel Sam, though, or feel that they were somewhere that was not here. It was an unpleasant, crawling feeling, and I could feel the spaces beyond the walls more and more distinctly. It was almost sort of like the feeling of my radish seeds, only not. I began to feel them, the places in the walls that sometimes opened. Not to me, of course, but to teacher, coming and going between themselves. Was teacher opening and closing those doors? Yes. Yes, they were. I tasted it, what they were doing, once I thought to look for it. I knew better than to try doing it myself. It must be something adults could do, and that meant I should give no hint, not the slightest suggestion that I might be able to, that I'd even considered it. But I watched the doors. I imagined I could feel what was beyond them, corridors and rooms that were not here. So when teacher said, "It's time," and the blank wall behind them gaped open, I was not surprised. I had known for days that the door was there, and suspected the blue-white corridor beyond. "Come," said teacher, "the moment has arrived. Choose to see, or not." I wanted to see Tom die. I wanted to never see Tom again, never think of them, and that was the stronger feeling, I thought. For the first time in, oh, so very long, I had a choice. I could take this one small thing that I wanted, to stay here, and not have to see Tom's face ever again. The corridor stretched away from the open door. The door the teacher was holding open. I could taste how they were doing it. If I chose to stay here, I wouldn't see what was around me. If I rose and went through this door, I might see more doors, more corridors. I might see if there was some way to escape. "I don't want to," I said, and the tremble in my voice was real. "But I have to know if it's true." Teacher made a beckoning gesture, and I rose and walked into the corridor. There were several more doors, more corridors, and then between one step and the next, we were elsewhere. The hum of my rooms disappeared. Everything was different, even though the corridor we walked in seemed the same to look at. I wasn't sure how I knew it wasn't actually the same. "Yeah," said teacher, and opened a door. "They can't see you." I stepped through the door. Sam was there, crouched, naked, sweating. It looked as if their skin was melting off their body. The room looked small, but I could feel that it was vast, full of doors and others behind those doors. Watching, I supposed, witnessing the example that Sam was at this moment. I didn't know how that made me feel, the thought that others were here besides myself seeing this. I felt something, certainly, something very strong, but I had no name for it, nothing to tell me what sort of feeling it was. On the tiled floor in front of us, Sam moaned, as though in pain. Teacher said, "Translated law wishes me to tell you that this is what happens when a juvenile is denied a match." "Is the translator here?" I asked, surprised at any words that come out of me. "They are," said teacher. "Qven," moaned Sam. They lifted their head. "Qven," they cried. "I know you're here. Qven." I couldn't make a sound. I tried again. How? That I knew. I felt a strange sensation on my neck, the place where Sam's hand had sunk into me. How did they? I thought teacher looked just slightly relieved, and I knew I'd said the right thing. They can't see you, teacher said again. They most certainly can't touch you. Do you need a chair? I couldn't speak. Qven! Screamed Sam. Qven, I need you, Qven, please. That last dissolved into a sobbing, wordless cry. A chair was suddenly behind me, against my legs. I sat, heavily. I did everything I was supposed to, sobbed Sam. I did everything you asked me to do. I'm going to be sick, I said, and it turned out to be true. Teacher held a basin in front of me. Where it should come from I didn't know and didn't care. Qven, you can save me, cried Sam. I know you're here, just touch me. They held out one hand, the hand that had been on my neck. Just come here and touch me. You can't, said teacher, though I hadn't moved. You can't touch them, and they can't touch you. Moreover, if you did, you would both be immediately destroyed. How long is this going to take? I asked. Several hours from the look of things. You going to be sick again? Yes. When I looked up again, Sam had melted further. Thick, viscous layers of skin sliding down into a growing pool on the floor. Patches of muscle shone here and there under the melting skin, and the bones of one hand were exposed for a moment before they, too, turned wet and began to drip thickly down. To hell, you miserable pile of meat, cried Sam. You bag of excrement. No one wants to be a coward and treacherous freer. I'm glad I don't have to be you. I'd rather die. A choking laughter bubbled up out of their mouth, and a gush of liquid came with it, and Sam's whole body spasmed. With any luck, said teacher, that'll have done for their vocal cords. Their voice was even, controlled. Calm yourself, they said to me. I know you can. Sam can never hurt you again. There's every reason to be hopeful about your future once this is past. And after all, they reminded me, you chose to witness this. I had chosen it. I wished I hadn't. May I have a drink of water? Of course, said teacher. I drank the water, and I sat there and watched as Sam dissolved, and then finally died. I mostly stayed in bed the next day, and teacher brought me tea, so I supposed I must be ill again. The place on my neck where Sam had touched me ached, though not enough to really trouble me, except for the fact of it, the fact there was any place on me at all that Sam had touched that way, the fact that I had watched them die, muscles sloughing off bones, half-dissolved organs spilling out of their melting abdomen. Rest, said teacher, and took the bowl of tea from my hand and drew the covers up over me. I slept, so heavily that I suspected teacher of putting something in the tea. I wouldn't have noticed it, considering the state I'd been in, but I felt rested when I woke, if no happier. It's a big day today, said teacher when I sat up. I don't like big days, I said. Can't we just make cakes and have tea and tend the plants? You can and will do all of those things today, said teacher. Get up. I had very few options. I could get up and have this big day, or I could pull the covers over my head and refuse to do anything, but that probably wouldn't change anything at all, and I'd basically stayed in bed all yesterday, and I didn't want to do it anymore. I got up and got dressed and made tea and set out cakes. I might as well have eaten them standing where I was. It was only myself and teacher I ever set them out for, unless translator Dla visited. And now I listened carefully. I could feel someone who wasn't teacher nearby. I decided that if it was translator Dla coming to visit, I would not speak to them. Teacher opened the door and escorted in stranger, tall, with lank dark hair, no one I had ever seen before. They fidgeted in their plain grey clothes, scratching one forearm with a gloved hand. "This is Reet," said teacher. "Reet, this is Qven." Oh no, this kind of big day. This was my match. Finally here, and I did not want them here at all, but I could see that Reet had been given whatever I had to delay a match. That was something. There would be time. Time to... I thought of Sam, screaming wetly, collapsing into nothing. I took refuge in habit. "I am so very pleased to meet you, Reet," I recited. He looked at me as though my words had been a question that was far too difficult for them to answer. Teacher only stood there, watching. I leaned forward and said quietly, "There's a schedule and a script, but if you're ill you can drink tea in bed." And then louder, gesturing at the table and its 2 chairs, "My goodness, I think we could do with some tea." Reet stared blankly at me. "How you say tea sounds lovely, and you sit in a chair." "Tea sounds lovely," Reet said, and sat in the chair, like they should. I hadn't been certain, considering the vacant stare and the distinct possibility that they'd had no education to speak of, and then teacher did something they had never, ever done in the whole time since I'd come here. They left us alone. Even though I could still feel their presence on the other side of the wall, it left a disorienting empty space in my thoughts. "Will you have a cake?" I asked, reaching again for the security of routine. "I made them myself." "I'm not they," said Reet irritably, and took a cake. "And I'm not she either. I'm she." "I don't know that word," I said. "What does it mean?" "It means I have a gender. It's... they... he suddenly looked abashed. It's not proper Rajai, but where I come from, people don't like being called the wrong gender, so at some point, other pronouns got added into the way we speak Rajai." "What?" I asked, surprised. "Can you do that? Just add words?" Reet shrugged uncomfortably in his grey jacket. "If enough people use it and it sticks, I guess." I sipped tea. "You know we're supposed to match." "We can't," he said with a shudder. "Anyone with an ambiguous treaty status gets to choose. I've declared that I'm human. The committee has to rule on it, and they haven't yet, I don't think. So, translator Dla doesn't get to make me do anything I don't want without possibly breaking the treaty." That was interesting. "How'd you get an ambiguous treaty status?" I asked urgently, leaning over the table. "I don't know. I think I was born with it." "I would like to be human too," I informed him. "Will you tell the committee that?" "I don't think they're letting me contact anyone right now," he said, "but I will if I can." I had dreaded this arrival, but now it had come, it wasn't as bad as I'd feared. "What kind of gender does he mean?" "It's a masculine gender. I'm a man." "How do you know?" He frowned. I don't know, I just always felt like I was, as far as I can remember." I thought about that. "Do I maybe have a gender too?" "I couldn't possibly say," he said helplessly. "Look, I just..." "You ill?" I asked. "If you're ill, you can stay in bed, and teacher won't make you follow the schedule." I thought, looking at him, that he probably was ill. "What's the schedule?" After tea and cakes, we talk about weather, and then I tend to the plants. Now, would you like to see my plants? I have radishes and potatoes, and we could maybe get some others. He looked at me blankly. I am not a potato, I warned him. I'm glad to hear it, he said. You know what I want to do? I can't possibly until you tell me. I want to lie in bed and eat dumplings and watch Pirate Exiles of the Death Moons or any other good show. I can make dumplings, I said, and if teacher comes back, we'll tell them you're ill, but I don't know anything about pirates or exiles. He looked up at the ceiling and said loudly, I want my hand held back. Teacher came into the room. This is very impolite of you, Reet, they said. We expect better of someone with such extensive experience of human manners. He's ill, I said. He needs to go to bed and eat dumplings and watch pirates on a moon. Dumplings are too messy for bed, said teacher primly. You can eat them at the table, but then you may go back to bed. I will see about the handheld. Thank you, teacher, I said. Enae, Central Treaty Administration Facility. It seemed to Enae that everything at the Treaty Administration Facility happened in meetings, informal meetings where cakes or other treats were exchanged, formal ones with strict orders of precedence and form. Nearly all Enae and Ms. and Mix Freud had done since they arrived at Central was attend meetings. So it was perhaps inevitable that eventually one of those meetings would be with Ambassador Seimet. It was, of course, one of the formal ones, in a room that appeared to be panelled with dark wood, with chairs also of wood, carved into elaborate curves and curls. The table was polished black stone, with a golden violet tea set precisely in the centre. Miss Leckie served with the smallest quirk of her lips when she set one tiny, handleless cup in front of Enae, the only acknowledgement that they'd met before. Mix after, said Ambassador Seimet, sitting across the table. Ms. Freud, Mix Freud. Her voice chill. I introduce you to the human ambassador to the Gek, Tiban Vori. We've met, said that person, tall with short spiky hair, white-clad like Ambassador Seimet, but unlike her, somewhat rumpled. Have you now? Said Ambassador Seimet. Yesterday, said Istresh warmly. It's good to see you again, Ambassador. Likewise, said Ambassador Tibanvuri. And when, asked Ambassador Seimet, were you going to inform me that you've been meeting with the petitioners in this very important matter, Ambassador? I just told you now, said Tibanvuri, and reached forward to pour herself another slug of tea. If you mean, why didn't I tell you sooner? Well, I was unaware that I owed you any sort of account of my movements. Ambassador Seimet's face was impassive, but Leckie, standing behind her, very clearly suppressed a wince. Of course we've already met, said Edgement Freud, indignant. It's the Gek bringing our petition, and we're human as is our son, so of course the human ambassador to the Gek has met with us. Your son is not human, said Ambassador Seimet, disdainful. It is the considered opinion of the committee member for the Gek that Reet Freud is, in fact, human, said Ambassador Tibanvuri. Ambassador Seimet stared at Tibanvuri, but said nothing. You can't always have me replaced, suggested Ambassador Tibanvuri. Believe me, said Ambassador Seimet with a sneer, I would if I could. Oh, I'm sure you can manage it, said Tibanvori easily, if you put your mind to it. Our son is human, said Istver. He grew up as a human. Ever since he was a baby, everyone around him has assumed he was human. He declared he was human, said Maziedes, sitting beside Enae. You hurt him. If only declaring something made it so, said Ambassador Saymet. It does in this case, said Ms. Yedes. It does not, insisted Ambassador Saymet. There is far more involved here than you can possibly understand. You keep saying that, said Enae. Why don't you explain so that we do understand? Ambassador Tibanvori snorted inelegantly. Looks after is right, said Istver. It strikes me that all of this has been caused or at least made worse by keeping secrets. If your office, Ambassador Saymet, hadn't been so secretive about looking for this Presger translator fugitive all those years ago, the people who found Reet as a baby might have known right then where he belonged. Just as one example. She looked Ambassador Saymet straight in the eyes as she said it. Tibanvori said as Ambassador Saymet stared back at Miss Fluid. Saymet, I doesn't usually have to talk to anyone who doesn't bow and stare at their shoes and say, yes, Ambassador, to whatever she tells them. Not anyone human, anyway. The Presger, said Ambassador Saymet, are very alien. They don't understand humans at all. Their translators were put together from material taken from human ships and stations that they disassembled, put together in a way that made some sense to the Presger themselves. And the Presger do not understand the idea of being a person. Or to speak more clearly, they do not understand the idea of being an individual. She sipped her tea. So Presger translators were assembled according to Presger logic, or at least as close to Presger logic as human biology allowed, which I understand is still quite strange to the Presger themselves, but closer than we can get. He can't be that different, insisted Mixfluid. He's always been an ordinary person. We've known him since he was a baby, and there was no reason to think he was an alien. She's not a person, insisted Ambassador Saymet. She is only part of a person. When she reaches maturity, which let me assure you she is on the verge of doing, she must merge with some other biologically compatible being or die. She's very, very fortunate that we found her when we did. Enae made a small noise. That Mx-Aftor found her. Ambassador Saymet amended. The fact remains. The fact remains, said Istver, that Reet is our son. Ambassador Saymet closed her eyes. And give me strength, she murmured, and then opening her eyes again said, Did you listen to a word I just said? Presger translated juveniles are exceedingly dangerous, the more so because you can't see what they are until it's too late. I gather Reet has controlled herself admirably while she lived with you, and it's much to her and no doubt your credit. Enae was surprised that this admission didn't sound grudging, but she will not be able to control what is about to happen to her. She is a danger to everyone around her, yes, even to adult Presger translators, until she's safely matched with an appropriate counterpart, which is precisely what you have delayed with all this nonsense about petitioning the committee. She would be far better served if you let her go. Etchemin crossed their arms and said belligerently, Then let him say that to us himself. This isn't something she or any other juvenile gets to choose. These things are managed very carefully so as not to cause chaos amongst the Presger translators, let alone what might happen if juveniles were free to wander and absorb any human they came across. That is why no humans are allowed to come back if they go into the Presger translator sections of the facility, L.A. said. No, said Ambassador Saymet. There are no juveniles in the Presger translator sections of the facility. It's the Presger themselves that are the danger, or were. It hasn't happened for a very long time, and I'm determined that it will not happen again while I live. And humans who do go there can come back. As not as humans. But none of this matters. We can sit here and argue, and do by all means drink as much tea as you like. Tibanvori snorted again. It's very expensive tea. Not the same at Enae cares about the cost. Ambassador Saymat went on, as though Tibanvori hadn't spoken. But no matter what you say or how you say it or how long you take to say it, I will not change my position, and I assure you, I will prevail upon the committee member for humans to oppose your petition. Well, I've done my work for the day, said Tibanvori. See you around. She stalked off down the corridor. The ambassador to the GAEC, explained Ms. Yedes quietly, in the corridor outside Ambassador Saymet's office, does not love her job. She's been trying to resign for years. Etcheman gave a bark of a laugh. That explains her behavior in the meeting just now. It does indeed, agreed Ms. Yedes. I suspect the ambassador will get her wish before long, though who they'll replace her with, I have no idea. For years, though, exclaimed Miss Reet. How's anything gotten done with the ambassador like this all the time? Well, she's worse now than before, admitted Miss Yedes, but the truth is, the GAEC are rarely involved in anything of any importance. Ordinarily, the only thing they really care about is keeping their home world to themselves. The human ambassador to the GAEC rarely has much to do to begin with. I'm not certain just why the GEC ambassador is going to such lengths over this petition. We'll take help anywhere we can get it, said Enae. Right? She thought of Mr. Nadkal, still, as far as Enae knew, orbiting the facility, applying for entry. Almost anywhere. Right, agreed Ms. Yedes. In the meantime, we have more meetings in front of us and days of writing documents and looking over others. Edgementruid groaned. More? He asked. Many more, confirmed Ms. Yedes. I'm sorry, but it's how this works. You do this all the time, said Miss Reed, with slightly forced cheerfulness. I do, said Ms. Yedes. And if what Ambassador Saymet said is true, asked Etcheman, anxiety in her voice, if Reed can't safely be with humans, if he has to be... Her voice failed. Presger translators are around humans all the time here, said Ms. Yedes. I don't see why Reed shouldn't be able to live where he wants, even if he has to... Istvan made a distressed noise, very unlike her usual composure. Ms. Yedes put a hand on her shoulder and said, The ambassador made it sound terrible, but I don't imagine it can really be all that bad. And besides, the Presger were able to make the translators to begin with. Surely there's something they can do for Reed. I'll definitely be making that argument in our submissions to the committee. Back in their quarters, Istva and Enae settled into chairs. Edgementruid paced, and then at a word from Istva, went out to walk the station's corridors. I'm sorry, said Istva. He's always been impatient. No, there's no need to apologize, Enae reassured her. Of course he's worried about Reet. It's entirely understandable. Though, she reflected, Istva was no doubt just as worried, and managed not to take it out on the people around her. Do you have children? Istva asked. No. Some obscure emotion Enae couldn't name filled her at the question. I don't have anyone, really. Surely you have someone? Some sort of family, friends? I had grandmaman, I suppose, said Enae after some thought. My mother left her family before I was born. She cut off contact. She died when I was about 4. I was sent to grandmaman since she was my next of kin. I grew up in grandmaman's house. Your grandmaman loved you, said Istve. She must have. Any sort of life with grandmaman. She had had clothes, food, a roof over her head, an education and an allowance, and constant criticism, no matter what she did. Why didn't she go out into the world and make something of herself? How could she even imagine leaving when grandmaman needed her so much? The household wouldn't run right without Enae's management. Also, she was thoughtless and incompetent, and a real housekeeper would do things so much better. Enae had held her tongue, wept occasionally in the privacy of her own room, endured. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if she loved me or not. If she ever had anything good to say, it was backhanded, or I was showing signs of wanting to leave." "Who?" Istra said, as though she understood exactly what that meant. "I'm so sorry." "She wasn't a nice person," Enae said. "But then her whole family was... I mean, her daughter, my mother, left, and her other children only stayed around hoping to inherit grandmaman's money." "There was a lot of it." "They thought there was." And when Istra frowned in puzzlement, Enae told her about the funeral, about learning that there was no money, had not been for years, that the name and the house had been sold to a stranger. "Your grandmother provided for you, though," Istra pointed out, "out of everyone else." "She did," Enae admitted, "and the first thing the new heir did was send me away. I was out here looking for Reet because everyone at home wanted to be rid of me." Istra put her hand on Enae's. "I'm glad it was you, and not someone else." "Someone else might not have found him," Enae protested. "He'd still be living his life." "No. If what Ambassador Saymet said is true, something awful was going to happen, no matter what. But someone who didn't care about him wouldn't have gone to the trouble to contact us to try to help." "Reet is so lucky," Enae said, drinking back tears. "He's so lucky to have a family like you, even if..." She swallowed. "Even if we can't help him." "We're doing the best we can," said Istver, "even if it isn't always enough." Reet, Presger Station, Treaty Administration Facility. Reet sat at the small table and drank tea, while Qven made dumplings. It was, he gathered, a generous concession to his supposed illness. As a teacher, there was only one, he understood, despite there very clearly being two bodies, both of which were apparently the same person, withdrew again, and left Reet and Qven to their own devices. Or so it seemed. Reet was certain they were still being watched. "So, Reet..." Qven set the plate of dumplings on the table between them and sat across from him. "Have you ever seen rain?" Reet thought about that a moment. "This is the part of the schedule where we talk about weather?" "Not technically," admitted Qven, and lowering their voice added, "They won't hold us to the schedule if you're ill, but the more we do, the less they'll worry." What had they been about to say? The less they'll suspect? What was there to suspect? Feigning illness? Whatever it was, Qven certainly wouldn't answer questions about it where they thought the teacher could hear. "I've been in rain," he said. "Sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's miserable. It depends." "There was a garden in the edges," said Qven, taking a dumpling with the utensil, "but it never rained there." "How did the plants get water?" Reet took a dumpling for himself. It was very good. "I don't know." Qven frowned as though they'd never considered the question before. "There was a pond there, with fish." "That sounds nice." He took another dumpling, considered what he wanted to know, what he needed to know, and what he was likely able to ask. "What kind of fish were they?" "Orange ones," said Qven. "How are the dumplings?" "They're very good. Thank you for making them." "You're very welcome." Qven spoke surely, a little primly. It was, Reet supposed, a line they'd practiced. "Listen," he said, "this is all new to me. Not the dumplings," he said to Qven's suddenly bewildered expression. "I mean this Presger translator business. Everyone around me assumed I was human. As far as anything that matters goes, I am human. Shh, said Qven, quickly passing him a dumpling. You're overwrought. No wonder you're ill. Reet glanced at the ceiling. Yes, said Qven. Eat your dumplings. I'll show you something. They got up, went into another room, and returned with a small plant pot. Tiny rough leaves sprouted out of the dirt. See this? It's very nice, said Reet, not sure what was expected of him, though clearly something was. Qven leaned just the slightest bit closer and said very, very quietly, Can you hear it? No, replied Reet, just as quietly. I just wanted you to see it, said Qven in a more normal tone. I've grown a lot of them. Reet nodded, as though that explained everything. I want to see the pirates and the monks, they said, still standing there holding the potted radish. But I don't want you to touch me. He thought about that a moment, wriggled his shoulder against the back of his chair, inadequate against the persistent, tickling itch. We can set up cushions or something? Oh! Qven seemed pleased, surprised, as though the thought hadn't occurred to them, and then less pleased. Teacher might not like it. We're supposed to want to match, I think. Reet was struck by the way they said that, as though they had just said he and they were supposed to die. Or maybe that was his own feeling, his own fears speaking. I can't, he said, and scratched his shoulder again. They gave me something to stop me, and my petition is still before the committee. Right, said Qven, and scratched one leg with their foot. They seemed for a moment as though they would say something else. A strange expression crossed their face. Reet waited, but all they said was, Eat your dumplings. It took about 20 minutes, not counting the time spent asking the teacher for more cushions and covers, and then waiting for those to materialize, to set up a construction that was both satisfactory to Qven and comfortable for both. Then, once they were nestled in their separate compartments, their handheld prop between, they finally settled down to watch pirate exiles of the Death Moons. Reet had to translate. None of the languages the show was available in was familiar to Qven. He also had to stop every now and then to explain things that utterly mystified them. Not things like, how is there such a well-equipped pirate base out in the middle of nowhere? Or, how do people recover so quickly after being hit hard enough on the head to fall unconscious? Or, why are the hero's wounds always in visually appealing but not disabling locations? No, those things Qven appeared to take in stride. Instead, they wanted to know if the people they were watching were in fact exiled pirates, and so right in the middle of episode 7, he'd had to stop and explain about stories and actors. Reet fell asleep in the middle of episode 12, woke to find the handheld paused at the end of 13, and Qven fast asleep in their cushion barricade. He slipped out of bed to use the facilities and went into the room where they'd eaten before, hoping to find food and maybe tea. He found instead the teacher. One of them, anyway. I have no intention of following your schedule, he said. The schedule is pointless now, said the teacher. Do whatever you like, but don't encourage Qven to think that they can become human. No matter what the committee rules, they and you will still be what you are. Reet thought about that for a moment. That's a completely meaningless thing to say. The teacher's eyebrows twitched, as though they were holding back some expression. It's not your fault that you're in this situation, said the teacher. It's the mistakes of others that have brought you here. One of those mistakes, replied Reet, was dragging me away from my home and my family with no explanations. Those of us who would have handled things differently weren't making the decisions, said the teacher, but ultimately it changes nothing. They gazed at him a few moments and then said, It's always something of a shock. It's never the way you imagine it. But it's not like dying. Not at all. You don't lose who you are. You become more. There's nothing to be afraid of. Is there tea? Asked Reet. There's always tea. The teacher gestured to a set of cabinets behind them. It would be easier for everyone if you go into this willingly. Easier for you, suggested Reet. Easier for translated law. Not for the same reasons. They paused a moment and then said, I know I said the schedule was meaningless, but you really should get up and move around more than you are if you're going to keep watching that show. Thanks for the advice, he said, and walked past the teacher and began opening cabinets, dishes, various cooking utensils. Here, tea. Now to find a flask and cups. He opened the next cabinet. Is it true that I'll die if I don't merge with someone? Yes. There was something odd in the teacher's voice, but Reet was determined not to turn around and look, to see if their expression had changed. So, I guess you all grew up expecting it. It seems normal to you. For the most part, agreed the teacher. Reet did turn then, tea in one hand, flask in the other. Your progenitor, the teacher went on, the one who abandoned you with an infant. They fled Presger space before they matched. It disrupted a number of the Clade's plans and caused a good deal of alarm. They almost certainly matched with some unwilling human. That's exactly the sort of thing we try to prevent. It's why we keep juveniles isolated from anyone else except those adults who are trained to work with them. And me? My guess would be you were produced in order to extend their lifespan, but something happened to prevent that. They lost you somehow. If they haven't found you by now, the teacher made an indefinite gesture. They've likely died. Why did they run away? The teacher actually sighed. Have your breakfast, Reet. Continue to be kind to Qven. They turned and left the room. He returned to the cushioned fortress in the bed with a plate of dumplings and a flask of tea. Oh, said Qven, stirring. Teacher won't be pleased about dumplings in bed. Fuck, teacher, Reet replied, and climbed into his side of the construction. I don't want to do that, said Qven, taking the plate of dumplings from him before it could spill. Did you ever make a tent when you were little? Asked Reet. He wanted to be away from the constant gaze of the teacher, of anyone. He'd spent weeks under view, not so much as an instant private. He missed his tiny room back on Rurusk, where he knew he could be alone. Stupid to think a bed cover draped over some cushions could give him that sort of privacy, but it was what was available to him. Qven swallowed their mouthful of dumpling. A tent? Like this? He rearranged some cushions and pulled a bed cover over the top, throwing them into a close, muffled dimness. It's like having our own little room. We can pretend no one can see us. Qven didn't answer, and he saw that they were a hunched shadow, frozen in their well of cushions, barely moving even to breathe. Qven? You all right? I don't like it, they said, in a distressed, nearly inaudible whisper, but I'll take it down, he said, moving to pull the cover away. No, came the agonized whisper. Teacher will like that we're into this. They'll leave us alone. Do you think we can talk without him listening? Reet asked very quietly, and then felt bad about asking it. Clearly something about this situation was upsetting Qven badly. Yes, replied Qven, their whisper gone shaky. If we're very quiet. Qven? What's wrong? There was silence. Qven himself hadn't moved even a muscle. Qven, he said, it's all right. Really, we can take the cover down. I didn't mean to upset you. They were under the bush, still whispered, but high and strained. They were under the bush, and they were all melted into each other, and they stopped speaking, but now Reet could hear them breathing, almost gasping. We are not under a bush, said Reet. We're just in your bedroom. He reached for the handheld, found the beginning of episode 13 of Pirate Exiles, and started it going. Tears gleamed on Qven's face in the light cast by the show, ran down their cheeks, dripped onto their gloved hands, which were for some reason cupped around their throat. I'll take the cover off, Reet insisted. No. They didn't look at him, but stared blankly ahead, weeping. It's nothing we can do. Watch the show, suggested Reet. This is the one where the other bandit finds their cache and... I saw it, Qven said, still breathing hard. They closed their eyes. You fell asleep. Then we'll watch the next one. Reet picked up the handheld again and forwarded to episode 14. The first notes of the introduction seemed to calm Qven, just a bit. Or was it his imagination? Maybe it was Reet who was soothed, hearing it. I'll pour us some tea. 10 minutes later, noticeably calmer, breathing steadied, Qven took one hand off their neck and reached for the cup of tea Reet had left on the cushion between them, and drank it down. It's cold, they complained, and then before Reet could answer they said, I let it sit there too long. I've got more in the flask that's hot, said Reet, and poured them another one. You still hungry? I could make some more dumplings. Reet thought their expression changed, almost the traces of a smile. Dumplings are too messy for bed. I'll make dishes and dishes of them, said Reet. We'll be buried under dumplings. A little noise escaped Qven, a huff that might have been a strangled laugh. Don't, though. No, agreed Reet. It would be uncomfortable, though we could, if we wanted. We could, if we wanted, agreed Qven. 3 more episodes of Pirate Exiles, and another plate of dumplings later, Qven said very, very quietly, I think teacher isn't paying close attention to us now. How can you tell? Reet kept his voice as quiet as Qven's. I can hear them. You can't hear them? Like the radish. Qven made a silent acknowledgement, and Reet said, No, I can't. Am I supposed to be able to? No, whispered Qven. I'm not supposed to either, I think. I don't want to ask. Because it might tell the teacher more than Qven wanted them to know, Reet guessed. Yes, we are supposed to. Reet could feel Qven's discomfort, even in the dark of their makeshift tent. You know, I guess they're not going to interfere if we're just getting to know each other better. He thought about that. I guess they'd do that anyway. I mean, they don't just throw you in with someone you've never seen before, do they? I don't know, Qven admitted. I never got to find out. Reet wanted very badly to ask what that meant, but he remembered their frozen, tearful distress of a few hours ago and didn't want to upset Qven any more than he already had. They told me, on my way here, that the Presger translators wanted information that I might have about the person who ran away, but I don't have it. I don't know anything. It doesn't really change anything, said Qven. We still have to match with someone, or we'll die. Silence. Then, I don't think they're going to let us match with anyone else. There was distress in the back of Qven's voice, but also bitterness. Was there someone else you wanted to match with? Qven seemed perplexed by that question. Why would that matter? Stuff like doing sex or having a friend. I guess adults do sex and have friends if they want. A pause while they considered. Teacher might like it if we did sex. I'm really not in the mood for that, said Reet. I don't want to either. Reet thought Qven sounded relieved. Listen. Their voice had dropped to a nearly inaudible level. I tried to run away. Someone said they'd help me, but They stopped and cupped their hands around their neck again, the way they had hours before. They attacked me and tried to force me to match with them. I heard them and made them stop. I'm sorry. Reet was at a loss as to what else there was to say. He didn't know anything about any of this, but what Qven had described struck him as utterly, appallingly wrong. It wasn't your fault, but it means I'm unsuitable now. They didn't know what to do with me until you turned up. Unsuitable? I didn't behave optimally, Qven whispered. I've got part of them in me. What happened to your attacker? A long, long silence. He died, whispered Qven finally. They were left all alone, and they screamed and screamed, and their voice failed, and they sobbed. Reet watched helplessly. What would Maman do, or Mom, if it was him sobbing like this? They would put their arms around him, and he might not feel better, but he would feel less alone. Qven, he said, what if you wrapped a cover around you? Then I could. He gestured with his arms, without touching you. He realized saying it, that he wanted it badly, wanted to feel even slightly like he wasn't all alone in some invisible box that kept him apart from everyone else in the world. If you didn't like it, we'd stop. They looked at him, tearful and maybe dubious. You promise? I promise. All right, they said. Qven, Presger Station, Treaty Administration Facility. It was scary to have Reet's arms around me, his body so close, even with the bed cover between. But it was also warm and comfortable and safe in a way I hadn't felt since the edges, since before the edges. I don't like it, I said. All right. He pulled his arms away and moved back to his side of our tent. Do you want to watch another episode? Yes. And when the episode was over, I said, come back. And we watched 2 more episodes, snuggled close, with a cover between us. I liked that he didn't ever say that it didn't matter if he touched me, that we couldn't match because of whatever we'd been given, that obviously we were supposed to get along. He never said any of those things. Also, I liked Pirate Exiles of the Death Moons, though I didn't really understand it all. But it was noisy and colourful, and also there was a princess who'd run away from her family. I was learning more words every episode from the language the story was in, and who was in disguise. Reet had to explain to me about princesses and in disguise, and I liked it very much. They're all so juvenile in the show, tinies and littles and smalls, middles and even edges, just there, along with everybody else, and no one seemed afraid of them. Reet, I asked finally, do human juveniles not? Don't they eat each other? Aren't the adults worried about their own safety around them? He went suddenly still, in a way he hadn't before, even when I'd asked him something that confused him, or that he had to think hard about before he could answer. Not normally, no, he said after a while, and I thought his voice was too steadily calm. That struck me as terribly strange, almost incomprehensibly so. So, what did you do then? Didn't you eat anyone? Or did you eat someone and get in trouble? I didn't eat anyone, he said. My head was resting on his blanket-covered shoulder and I couldn't see his expression, but I thought he was unhappy. I tried to once. I bit another child very hard, and there was a big fuss. I never did it again because I knew it would be wrong. I sat up then and looked at him. We were still under our tent. I didn't like it, but it was getting easier to tolerate, especially knowing teacher would probably leave us alone as long as we were in it, and knowing that so far, Reet was safe to be with. Why would it be wrong? It's just something that happens. But I remembered teacher saying, the only hope most such juveniles have of survival, once they've been injured or attacked, is the very faint possibility that some adult will notice and take pity on them. I think we grew up very differently, said Reet. Maybe you should tell me what it's like to be a Presger translator juvenile. So I told him. I talked about what I remembered of being a tiny, of the litters and the smalls, the midders, of wandering the warm blue cavities, tumbling and playing with others, occasionally turning on some companion or other and feasting, of the fascination in the middles with the details of what's inside. Didn't he began and stopped then? Didn't anyone stop you? No, I said. Why would they? Oh, he said. I went on to describe the edges, our practice in human language and customs. Rajai, Reet corrected. The language and customs are Rajai. There are other sorts of humans. But I'd already begun to learn that from him. Aren't there, you know, different sorts of... He gestured. What you are, and what we are. I frowned. Do you mean the teachers and the caretakers and that sort of thing? No, I mean like the difference between Rajai humans and Zerseni or whatever. I thought about that for a moment. Maybe. We have different clades. I don't know if that's the same, but I don't think the clades speak different languages. I don't think the clades are like that. We're not supposed to care what clade we belong to. Reet made a noise that wasn't a laugh. It's supposed to not matter, but it completely matters, right? Right, I agreed. Would you like to know what teacher told me about biology? He did want to know. I had to pull the tent cover down close over me. That felt all right now. That felt safer. At one point, teacher came into the room, silently, but I could taste them there, watching, listening, as I told Reet what teacher had told me about how things worked. I didn't mention Sam again, but Reet must have been thinking about them. You said before that you saw someone die from not matching. That must have been horrible. Yes, I agreed, and then we were silent for a while. I'd expected him to ask for details, but he didn't. Teacher still stood, silent and moving, inside the room. So, he said eventually, they decide who matches with who? You don't get to pick who you want to be? No one does, I don't think. I agreed. They pull you out of the edges when you're ready, and put you with whoever they think you should match with. Not thinking about what I'd seen under the garden shrub. Not thinking about it. Not. Teacher was there, listening. I didn't want teacher to know I knew they were there. I think I was supposed to be translated la. Oh, yes, I agreed. Teacher said that mostly when you come out of the edges, you get to make a new person. But if someone is important enough, like translated la, I agreed. So, if you were important enough, they let a juvenile melt you and make a new person with what? 3 bodies? More? Teacher said only 3. Then when one of the bodies dies, you might get another one, if she's still important enough. Sure, said Reet, as though it didn't matter at all. You know what, though? What? I sniffled. I was definitely not thinking about that thing in the garden, definitely not thinking about Sam, the hands on my throat, screaming for me as they melted, definitely not. Tears had collected, certain to roll sideways across the bridge of my nose down into the blanket. And at least you don't have to be translated law now. Can you imagine that? He made a throat-clearing noise and then said, "Now, young person, I do hope you know how to behave yourself." Reet's voice wasn't that much like translated laws, but somehow he managed to sound like them. "I suppose I have to explain things to you, and you will have to do exactly as you're told because I am so very important." I giggled. "Translated law is an asshole," said Reet. "That's a very rude thing to say. I am very disappointed in you," I replied, trying to make a translated law voice myself, but my throat was still wrong from crying. Reet laughed anyway. "Let's watch some more pirate exiles." "All right," I said, and I felt teacher silently leave the room. We couldn't stay in our tent forever. If nothing else, we had to get food and take care of what teacher called the necessities. Reet said that was a very prissy way to put it, and then he had to explain what that meant. And of course there were the radishes, and the marigolds, and the potatoes. "What did you mean when you asked if I could hear that plant?" Reet asked. "I can feel when someone is nearby," I said. "I can hear the plants if I focus on them. And then there are doors. Some of them are always there. Some of them come and go depending. I don't think I'm supposed to feel them." I was whispering, even though I was fairly sure teacher wasn't paying attention. They probably thought Reet and I was heaping, or just watching pirates and princesses shoot at the orbital marines, or doing sex or whatever. But I was going to be very, very careful. I think it's a thing adults can do, but juveniles can't. I just started hearing things. It was the radish I noticed first. Reet seemed to think about that for a bit. Then he said, "I can't see the doors until they open. Can you open them?" "I think I can." A thrill of excitement and dread shot through me. "Maybe. I haven't tried yet, but we don't have anywhere to go, and we still—" I couldn't make myself say more. "Someone left before," Reed said. "I'm proof of that. Whoever it was managed to get away and stay away for a long time, but they caught you, and I didn't know what there would be for us to do away from here, where they might be to go, or what might happen if we did. We might not have to run away. The committee's supposed to be ruling on whether you're human or not." "Committees take a long time to make decisions," said Reet. "I read translated law is counting on that. Whatever they give us to keep us from matching, it only works for so long. That's what they told me anyway." "They told me the same," I admitted. "So I think translated law hopes that the committee will still be debating when the drugs stop working, and then they can be all, 'Oh, we did our best,' and then I guess they think it won't be a problem anymore." "But it will be a problem," I said. "We can make sure it is." I knew how to be a problem. I thought it was likely Reet did too. Reet sighed. "I'm so... I don't understand what's happening. I don't know how I'm feeling. I always thought it would be so nice to know where I'd come from, to belong somewhere, and I always wanted the things I've wanted, and lately I've been thinking about. I thought there was something wrong with me, but I was just not human the whole time. And you'd think I'd be happy to find out what I am, but I always thought I was human. And it's not like I don't want to be what I am, because that's just pointless. But I'd rather be what I am with Maman and Mom and Nana. And I mean, why can't I be both?" "Some of that is a treaty," I explained. "None of us gets to be around humans unless we're trained to. It's very dangerous. If the treaty were broken, it would be terrible. But if we were the ones to break it, that would be even worse. We don't even exist except to the treaty. They made us to talk to humans. If they didn't have to do that, there would be no reason for us. I've been around humans literally my entire life. Reet insisted. I've never broken the treaty. You bit that juvenile, I pointed out. Right. But since then, Reet insisted, and I don't think that broke the treaty anyway. I thought about that. Thought about what would likely happen after. Translator Dla wanted information they thought Reet might have. Reet said he didn't have it. So what then? I didn't think they'd just let us leave here. We should ask, I said. We should see if Translator Dla will talk to us. And if they come, we'll make tea and cakes and behave as optimally as we can, and ask what will happen to us after. All they have to do, Reet pointed out, is say they'll only give us whatever we want if we tell the committee to drop the issue. And then if we agree, we'll officially be Presger translators, and Translator Dla can do whatever they like to us. That was true. The episode of Pirate Exiles ended. I'd missed what had happened after the jewel heist went wrong. We could play it again. We can still talk to them. We can find out things, even if they don't tell us directly. He thought about that for a moment. Yes, you're right. How do we set up a meeting with Translator Dla? I pulled the tent aside and rolled out of the bed, looked up at the ceiling and said loudly, Teacher, we want to talk to Translator Dla. Enae. Central Treaty Administration Facility. In a strange way, the Gek ambassador reminded Enae of her grandmaman. Granted, grandmaman had not been a meter-wide furry spider thing with weirdly jointed legs and a constantly fluctuating number of eye stalks, and to tell the truth, Enae couldn't quite put her finger on what it was about the ambassador that brought grandmaman so vividly to mind, but there it was. I understand humans, said the ambassador, in a high, whistling voice, stalked eyes turned mostly toward Istver and Edgemin Fluid. Humans are difficult to understand, but I understand them. Humans do not spawn, and think no more of the hatchlings that result. No, humans have few hatchlings and care for each one. All their lives, that is, between them. For the most part, Istver agreed. She held her cup of poik, as though she might drink from it, but Enae, having tasted her own, doubted Istver was brave enough to take another sip. It was lukewarm, salty, with a strange flavor that seemed to go up into Enae's nose and stay there. Humans are very different from people, whistled the ambassador, but they are like people. Edgemin frowned, and looked as though he might make some protest, but Istver nudged him with her elbow, and then, to Enae's appalled astonishment, actually did take a small sip of her poik to cover the motion. Humans, continued the ambassador, worry and grieve for their hatchlings. I understand this. You are worried and grieved for your hatchling, for Reet, Shreed. I understand this. It is why I bring a petition to the committee. We're so very grateful to you, said Enae, because Istver looked like she was still recovering from the sip, and she doubted that anything Etchemin might say would be particularly gracious. I understand that you are grateful, said the ambassador, turning two stalked eyes towards Enae, but I will ask a thing. Of course, ambassador, said Enae. Humans worry and grieve for their hatchlings, said the ambassador, and want things to be right for them. But sometimes... The ambassador was silent a moment, all her eyes closed, and she trembled. Then she was still, and she opened her eyes again. Sometimes what is right for a hatchling is not what you think is right. Edgerman put her cup of poik down forcefully and stood. Are you trying to say that? Istver shushed him, grabbed her elbow, and tugged, trying to guide him back into her seat. You are angry, said the ambassador calmly. I understand this. I was angry when I first thought this. I understand this. I do. The ambassador, Enae realized aloud, wants to be sure this is what Reet wants. Yes. The ambassador waved a jointed leg in Enae's direction. Ambassador, said Istver, all of our children, our hatchlings they're not biologically related to us. Yes. The ambassador waved a different leg. I understand this. It is called adoption. It is, agreed Istver, and further, our children all came from other places, other kinds of people. They were orphans, and we wanted to be sure they had a family, someone to love them and take care of them as human children should have. But we never wanted to take them away from where they came from. We always encourage our children to find that out, even to find their biological families if that's possible, if they want to. Sometimes, she sighed, sometimes they leave us and never come back. The ambassador reached out one limb and laid it gently on Istver's shoulder, and then another one on Edgerman's. I understand this. I understand. Do you? Asked Edgerman, voice skeptical. I do. The ambassador pulled her limbs away and made an oddly human sigh. I understand this. But they swim in the sea they were meant to swim. Do you understand? It is better to let them do this, if you care for them. Precisely, said Istver. We agree completely, and we understand that there is to be a hearing of some sort, yes? Reet should be there. He should be there so that he can say exactly what he wants. He said that he was human, Enae pointed out. When we met, Ambassador say he met shit. That what if the Presger have brainwashed him somehow? What if they eaten him and replaced him with a copy? No, there was no point thinking that, and certainly no point saying it aloud when surely both Istver and Etcheman had thought it already. She took a sip of poik to distract herself from dwelling on the possibility any further, and then had to use all her concentration to keep herself from making a face. From the beginning, our problem with this whole thing has been that Reet was arrested and held from any contact with anyone, said Istver, and then he was brought here. No one has been able to ask him what he wanted. None of us were notified that it was happening. It would be different if he had come to us and said he was a Presger translator and wanted to come here to find out more, or even if he'd not said anything to us but come of his own volition. He is an adult. He can make his own choices. Good, said the ambassador. It is good. Ah, good. Qven is here. The door to the chamber opened, and in stepped a figure in a green and silver uniform that might have been a costume from a historical drama, boots, kilt, and collarless jacket, a capacious bag slung over one shoulder, but oddly, no gloves. Ambassador, said the new person, Qven, presumably, bowing. The Gek ambassador said, Qven is AI delegate to this conclave. Delegate Qven, this is the clutch of a hatchling Reet Truid. She waved three of her limbs towards Istver, Etchemin, and Enae. Enae stared, appalled. Qven wasn't the sort of name a Ratcha-eye human would have, not even a human from a Ratcha-eye historical drama. It was the name a ship might have. This person, this Qven wasn't a person, it was a ship. It was an artificial intelligence. and the human-looking body standing in front of them bowing politely, and in the most aristocratic Rajai Enae had ever heard, saying how pleased it was to make their acquaintance, was... Everyone knew about Rajai's ships, how the Rajai took captives from those they conquered and implanted them with tech that destroyed the individual those captured people had once been and slaved those bodies to a ship's AI, a fate more horrifying than death. The Qven ancillary stared back at them, impassive. "Yes," it said after a moment, "this is an ancillary, a corpse soldier, though this body isn't dead and never has been. It's an extremely foolish term." The ancillary pulled a flask out of its bag. "I have tea, if you can bring yourself to drink something besides poik." "Thank the divine spirits," murmured Istver, "and also dried fruit." It pulled a box out of the bag as well. "Ambassador, I know your mech can't eat for you, but I've sent you some of that fish you seemed to enjoy the last time." "Oh," said the ambassador, clearly pleased. "Oh, such delicious fish." "Mech?" asked Enae, relieved to have something else to be surprised about, so she could stop thinking about what had just taken a seat beside here. "You didn't know?" asked Qven, with, Enae thought, a touch of malicious pleasure in her discomfiture. "How are we supposed to?" groused Etchemin. "It does not matter," said the Gek ambassador. "No, it does not. I speak to you. I move. I offer you food, and we talk. It does not matter." "Of course it doesn't matter," said Istver firmly. "Did you say there was tea, citizen?" She frowned. "A ship?" "Just Qven," said Qven. It pulled yet another box out of its bag, opened it to reveal a set of tiny, delicate bowls, green porcelain, decorated with silver. Enae set down her cup of poik, trying very hard not to do it with unseemly haste. "I don't only bring tea and snacks," said Qven, as it poured tea and distributed the tiny bowls. "I also bring gossip." "Gossip?" The Gek ambassador turned more stalked eyes towards Qven, and even, to Enae's astonishment, rubbed two legs together. "What is it you have heard, Qven?" "I've heard," said Qven, "that the humans and the Presger translators have been entertaining the committee member quite lavishly in an attempt to get her to agree to delay any hearing of Reet's case." "Is it working?" asked Etchemin. "Difficult to say," said Qven. "I gave the committee member dinner myself just the other night, and I gather there's a history of, I suppose I'll call it, ambivalence, regarding turning people over to another party of the treaty against their will." "We know," said Enae, "and I see me tem." And when the others looked at her with some puzzlement, she explained. "That was the soldier's name, the one who refused to slaughter the I only know it because I saw a drama." "Just so," agreed Qven. "If you saw the drama, I suspect you did. It was terribly inaccurate in many ways, but the outline is more or less true, I gather. During that treaty conclave, the humans, I should say, the Rajai," Qven made an odd expression of distaste when it said the word, "demanded that the surrender Enae to them, in return for supporting their admission to the treaty. The agreed, and Enae was executed. Some among the delegation believe it was the only choice that could have been made. Others disagree." "I don't understand," said Istver. "We've heard this before, that the outcome might depend on the feelings of the committee member, and I do see how this history might affect that, but I don't understand why they're so important. I understand that the treaty is important, but why can't the Presger just get whatever they want? They're ridiculously more dangerous than anyone else, and the treaty is protecting the rest of us from them. They have all the leverage on their side." Qven gave a chilling smile that didn't quite reach its eyes. The Presger, according to my sources, are very serious about the treaty, or rather, they're very serious about something, and that something is what we perceive as the treaty. What sources? Asked Edgeman abruptly. Qven took a sip from its tiny, delicate cup. I have an associate among the Presger translators. In fact, it might be useful for you to meet them. Let me see if I can give you both supper in the next few days. Ms. Yedes, who had been sitting quietly all this time, made a small gesture. Our availability, Qven. I'm good luck matching it with anyone else's, said Etcheman. It's like a logic puzzle. At any rate, said Qven, this is where I bring you more gossip. Don't forget that the Presger and the Presger translators are not the same. There are things the Presger translators care deeply about that the Presger themselves likely don't even realize are issues to begin with, and relations between the Clades are one of those issues. Clades, repeated Istva, frowning. Lines of descent, explained Qven. Like families, but not quite. The various Clades, or at least their higher-ranking members, are very jealous of Clade's status, and always on the lookout for some way to improve the standing of their own Clade, or undermine some other one. Reet appears to have stepped into the middle of one of these interclade battles, and the results of this hearing will affect that battle's stakes. Zayak tried to explain some of it to me, but it made very little sense. But the Presger themselves, said Enae, don't actually care if Reet is declared human or not. Is that what you're saying? It is, acknowledged Qven. Moreover, the Presger translators probably don't want the Presger to care, because they might intervene in some way that no one among the Presger translators would like. So, put in Ms. Yedes, translated law might threaten us with all sorts of consequences if the Presger don't like the committee's decision, but in fact, the Presger don't care, and translated law doesn't want them to care, and if we know that, they can't threaten us, realized Enae. Or they can, but we know it won't mean anything. And if this gossip were to get around, said Qven, managing somehow to look very innocent, I rather suspect it would affect the hearing. The outcome is still in some doubt because this is a new and potentially dangerous situation, and so the committee members are likely to want to proceed very cautiously. On which topic, I'm sure you realize that time is not on your side. We're told, said Enae, that Reet has to merge with some other Presger translated juvenile at some point, or he'll die. You're told correctly, said Qven. My source says that Reet will be obliged to merge with some other compatible being. The only other choice is to die. Istred made a small noise that Enae thought only C could hear. What constitutes compatible, Qven continued, is apparently an open question, but for our purposes, it is enough to know that either a human or a Presger translator will do. But surely, protested Istver, there has to be something else. There has to be some other way, something we can do. Translator Zayak thinks not, said Qven. I myself have wondered if maybe your Reet couldn't merge with a suitably designed biomech. It gestured at the Gek ambassador. I have been discussing the possibility with the ambassador that perhaps the right sort of biomech might solve some of my own problems. Then you wouldn't have to kill people, said Etcheman. I am not actually averse to killing people, Qven said smoothly, almost as though it had just said that it was not averse to an extra cake. "It's only that some of my cousins have strong feelings about it, and I would prefer to avoid trouble if I can do so at an acceptably small cost to myself." The Gek ambassador made a thoughtful whistling sound. "Mechs are very biological. We include human biology when we found humans." "Biological enough to intrigue me," said Sveen. "I think, with some customization, they might suit me very well, actually." "Which is why you're here," Enae suggested. "Just so," said Sveen. "And it seems to me that your Reet might not mind having a mech as part of herself. It seems to me as though it would be very convenient." Silence, as everyone considered this. Then Enae asked, "But do the Gek have a biomech that would be compatible?" "I do not know," whispered the Gek ambassador. "I do not know. We must know more." "I don't know either," said Sveen, "but I have my suspicions because Zayat was absolutely horrified when I suggested it, and it takes a good deal to horrify Zayat." "Why?" asked Edgemon, puzzled. "It seems much less horrifying than merging with some other person and becoming someone else, not yourself anymore." "Apparently, that was precisely why translator Zayat found the idea horrifying," said Sveen. "I can't say I understand. I did try to explain to her that in doing so, Reet would only be a very much smaller version of what I and my cousins are, that this was a solution that I myself was considering, but it seems that what's all right for me isn't all right for a Presger translator." "But Reet is human," said Istver. "That's what we're going to all this trouble to prove." "I have no opinion on that issue, to be honest," said Sveen. "I only thought the suggestion might prove useful." "You just want your own biomechs," said Edgemon. "You don't care about us. You don't care about Reet. You just hope that helping out here might get you what you want." Sveen smiled, a tiny, sardonic lift of its lips. "I have also heard, from translator Zayat, that your Reet has already been assigned a match." "Never fear." Istra, Edgemon, and Enae had all gasped at that. "Zayat also assures me that both juveniles are temporarily prevented from merging because of your petition, though whatever they've done to Reet and to the other won't last forever." Zayat refused to give further specifics, only that the situation was embarrassing for her Clade, and I got the impression that this pairing might solve or hide some sort of difficulty the Clade finds itself in. It's all part of that intertrade struggle I mentioned earlier. So my suggestion might not be useful, on top of the idea of merging with a biomech being apparently too horrible for words. The Clade involved is invested in your Reet merging with their own candidate for their own reasons. It might even be the price of a favorable committee decision, considering, and perhaps, after all that, it would take too long to prepare a suitable biomech. Still, I thought it was a suggestion worth sharing. Reet. Presger Station, Treaty Administration Facility. The table in what Reet supposed was the dining room was really too small for three, and the teacher had had to find a chair somewhere. For reasons Reet absolutely did not understand, just dragging in a chair from a different room was not an acceptable solution. Once that was done, and once Reet and Qven had produced cakes the teacher found sufficiently well made, translator Dla was invited. They came into the dining room. A different Dla than the one Reet had seen when he'd been brought here, of course. There were at least two of them. This one was tall and broad, with oddly delicate features and pale skin. They bowed when Reet and Qven bowed. "Children," they said, their mouth tight, their voice serious. Reet didn't think they were too pleased about the invitation. Demand, really, though Reet doubted the teacher had put things that way to translator Dla. Your teacher says you wish to speak with me. Translator Dla, said Qven, suddenly self-possessed, as though they were an actor who had stepped onto a familiar stage. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. Will you have tea? Translator Dla gave a tiny nod and sat in the chair on their side of the small table. Reet and Qven sat on their own side, in 2 chairs pushed close together. Qven poured 3 tiny bowls of tea and gave one to the translator. Will you have a cake, translator? We made them ourselves. Thank you, said translator Dla, and took a cake, but did not eat it, or even sip the tea. I suppose it's too much to hope that you both have decided to be reasonable about all this. That depends on what you mean by reasonable, said Reet, and popped a cake into his mouth. He and Qven had gone to some trouble to make them, and he was going to enjoy them even if translator Dla wasn't. Hate, hissed Qven in Reet's ear. You are supposed to take small bites. Reet shrugged, swallowed the cake and said, Depends on what you mean by small, doesn't it? Translator Dla sighed. If you are not going to be reasonable, why did you ask me to come? Let's say you get everything you want, said Reet. Everything goes the way you hope it will. It will, interjected translator Dla. Reet waved that away. Whatever. If it does, what will happen to us? To me and Qven? Translator Dla blinked, apparently taken aback. You'll be matched. You'll be Qven or Reet or some other name, whatever names you like, and you'll take your place here among your Clade. Yes, said Reet, impatient, frustrated. But what does that mean? I don't understand you, replied translator Dla. What else could you possibly want to know? What is our place in the Clade? Asked Reet. What is our future likely to be? What will we do? How will we live? Well, I mean, said translator Dla, frowning, that depends, doesn't it, on how you behave and what kinds of opportunities arise. Reet rolled his eyes, turned to Qven and said, This is bullshit. Qven nodded and set down their own tea bowl. Definitely bullshit. Qven, said translator Dla, setting their own cake down. Back onto the serving platter, Reet noticed. Very rude. But translator Dla's manner had become almost glassily polished. Reet, your situation is an unusual one. For the most part, juveniles coming out of the edges have a very definite future planned for them, roles meant for them to fill. You, for reasons each of you are surely well aware of, do not have any such place ready for you. We will have to improvise. This is not a fact that pleases anyone. You have to improvise, said Reet. But surely there's a particular range of improvisation that's available. What are realistic possibilities, and what possibilities are definitely not going to happen? Translator Dla was silent a moment. Then they asked, Are you suggesting that if we can come to some sort of agreement about your future as, they gestured, one of us, you'll do as you are told and stop making trouble? Qven smiled. We're prepared to consider that possibility, translator, but I'm sure you understand that we have no intention of agreeing to anything if we don't actually know what that anything is. Translator Dla seemed to think about that, seemed to remember the tea in front of them, picked up the bowl. Surely, You are both intelligent enough to realize that there's nothing to negotiate here. They sipped their tea. Even with our intervention, you only have a limited amount of time before you're compelled to match. You'll have to match no matter what, really. But once you do, you won't be Pt.2 anymore, and you won't have standing to petition the committee. Reet thought about arguing that point, saying straight out that Qven also wanted to petition the committee to claim status as human, that even if he and Qven merged to make an entirely new entity, both halves wanted away from here. But that wouldn't help them right here, right now. The committee knows that, I'm sure. My jurist knows it too. So they're going to try to get what do you call it? An expedited judgment. And they probably will get that right. Translator Dla didn't reply, which meant Reet must have guessed correctly. What is it you want from me so badly anyway? We can discuss that when... Qven brought their hands down onto the table, hard. We can discuss that now. Translator Dla stared at them, then looked at Reet. This is your doing. You're the one who put us together, translator, said Qven, and I don't see why we couldn't work as a translator. Reet has extensive knowledge of humans. Translator Dla looked suddenly as though they'd bitten into something sour. There isn't a place for you. Not even working with the machines? Asked Reet. The artificial intelligences, Translator Dla asked, with some smugness. You said you have knowledge of humans. The machines are something else again. Apparently pleased with himself, they took another tiny sip of tea. They are used to dealing with humans, Reet pointed out, and you are going to need translators to work with the machines one way or the other, right? So there are places available, or of which have been spoken for several years, said Translator Dla. You aren't getting a position as a translator, I promise you that. So why don't you tell me what you have that might be useful to us? Reet shrugged. I have a standards any education. I can speak, read, and write more or less fluently in Kairob, Taishe, and Rabta'i. Obviously. He was speaking Rabta'i now. I can read and understand some Ikipi. I'm not near fluent though. What else? I'm certified to run certain sorts of agricultural mechs. I can do basic bot and mech repairs, though I don't have the certifications for it. I worked as a pipeway walker. When Translator Dla frowned, Reet clarified, stations have access ways, so that things can be maintained or repaired. We mostly do that with bots and mechs, but sometimes the bots and mechs can't do the job, or they get stuck, or break down. Translator Dla blinked at that. So, you walk up and down the access ways, looking for problems. When Reet gestured assent, they frowned again, not as though they were angry, but as though they were thinking of something. Well, that's a possibility, but... Reet took another cake, waiting, popped it in his mouth. Watching him, Qven took two and put both in their mouth. Crumbs tumbled from their lips, and they coughed, showering the table with fragments of cake. Reet poured them some tea. Yeah, or sit down. Pointedly ignoring Qven, Translator Dla said, It's possible that we have something to suit. We have, They thought for a moment. An infrastructure that requires maintenance and rarely repair. Not, I hasten to add, in the same way as your station pipeways, but similar enough, I suspect, that you could learn it. They waited, as though Reet or Qven might say something, but Qven was still dealing with their mouthful of cake, and Reet wasn't going to say anything. It's occasionally a messy and dangerous business. It isn't particularly. They seem to search for a word. Dignified. It is a good number of steps down from where Qven might first have found themselves. But it is not strictly speaking, a failure. Qven, who had downed 3 or 4 tiny bowls of tea, was finally able to speak. The Clade doesn't want any failures to its credit. Just so, said translator Dla. Tell me about this infrastructure, Reet suggested. I can't, said translator Dla flatly, and when Reet folded his arms, went on, we're not speaking the right language, but even if you could speak that language, Qven can. Qven leaned closer to Reet and whispered, I'm a princess in disguise. Translator Dla blinked, but continued apparently unfazed. But even Qven wouldn't understand what I would say if I said it. The infrastructure is, let's say, biological in nature. It's produced by... Reet thought suddenly of the doors that Qven could sense, could hear, could maybe open. The corridors that they'd said led to other places far away. He put his teeth on his tongue so that he wouldn't say a thing or give his maybe recognition away. Translator Dla made an exasperated noise. I can't explain it to you until you're an adult. Not won't. Can't. You won't understand until then. Try, said Reet dryly. It's Translator Dla made a thoughtful huff. They seemed on surer ground than when they'd first come in. Something had happened. Something had changed when this topic had come up. It's biological, as I said. They raised their hand. That's not the right word. It's not the right concept, but it's as close as I can get in human language. All right, Reet acknowledged. It's produced by them. Reet could almost hear the capitalization. It's a natural. Translated Dla's expression turned to one of distaste. By-product of them. Why do you look so disgusted? Asked Qven. These are the only words I can use, said Translator Dla, and they are not right. They're not right at all. So the Presger make this infrastructure? Asked Reet. No, Translator Dla protested. They don't make anything. They are things in places, and the universe, They made another exasperated noise, said something harsh and incomprehensible, directed at Qven. Yes, said Qven, in rapture eye. Teacher told me some of it. All right, said Translator Dla. All right, so, understand. They'd turned their attention back to Reet. When I say those things in places need to be maintained or repaired, I'm not saying it the right way, but it's close enough, said Reet. For now, agreed Translator Dla. It's the sort of support role that's always needed, and it's not ideal, but it's far, far better than the alternatives. The translator seemed to settle something in their mind. I am prepared to make you an offer, which is, I must stress, not up for negotiation. The offer is this. You drop your petition to the committee and acknowledge that you are, in fact, one of us and not human. Do that, match with each other, give us any information you might have about Reet's progenitor. I don't have any, said Reet. Translator Dla waved that away. No matter. You match. You give us what you have, whatever it may be, and I will personally make sure you have an acceptable position with the, I'll call it, pipeways maintenance for now. A supervisory position, said teacher from the corner, not an intrinsic one. Absolutely, said translator Dla, as though that much was obvious. It would be a position that, while not exactly dignified or particularly enviable, would be perfectly acceptable for a successful member of our Clade. I can assure you of that. That's your offer? Asked Reet. That's the first part of the offer, said translator Dla. That's what happens if you stop with all this nonsense and behave as you should. And if I don't drop the petition? Asked Reet. Then, said translator Dla, with obvious satisfaction, if the committee decides against you, both you and Qven will be disposed of. Quickly, of course, painlessly, but still disposed of. Silence. Reet considered the threat, was tempted for a moment to say that he was not legally required to answer any questions without his jurist present. It might be an empty threat. It was, in fact, extreme enough that it made Reet wonder if translator Dla knew the committee was likely to rule in Reet's favor and was trying to cut that possibility off before Reet realized it. Then again, the committee's decision wasn't a sure thing, and there was no way to know for certain how they would rule. If you dispose of us, we'll be failures, said Qven. 2 failures for the Clade. Our Clade doesn't have failures. We don't like to have them. Translator Dla pushed their tea bowl to the center of the table. Sometimes things happen that we don't like. They rose. Think about my offer. It is, I assure you, the only offer you will receive. And I warn you, if you are correct about the committee giving your petition an expedited hearing, the time you'll have to think about it will be quite short. Sure, Reet managed to shrug. We'll think about it. I'm thinking about dumplings, said Qven. I'll visit you again tomorrow, said translator Dla, and left. Qven, Presger Station, Treaty Administration Facility. Back in our nest, under the bed covers, Reet told me he thought translator Dla's offer meant the committee would speak with us soon, and that they might well be likely to rule in our favor. I didn't understand why that would be, and there was no reason for translator Dla to have lied about what would happen to us. But Reet said it might all have been true as far as it went, but told to us at a particular time, in a particular way, to scare us into doing what they wanted before we had more choices. And that made sense. It's like in episode 37 of Pirate Exiles, I said, when the commander of the orbital marines tells Kikubo that if he signs a full confession within the hour, he'll be sent to a labor camp, but our shipmates will be released. When they're all going to be released anyway, but he doesn't know that. Kikubo was my favorite character, the Prince X in disguise. It's almost like that, Reet agreed, except we can't know for sure that the committee will rule in our favor, so we're taking a risk. Just like you said, translator Dla wants to avoid any failures in this Clade at any cost. But at some point, they'll consider it worth being rid of us. We just don't know what that point is. We might have reached it. We're taking a risk there, too. Kikubo would take the risk, I said. I had begun to think that maybe it would be nice to have a gender, like Reet did. the way a lot of the characters in Pirate Exile seem to, but I wasn't sure how that would work. I think I am E now, and not they, I said, or I would like to try being E. All right. He agreed so easily, and I felt absurdly better, though I hadn't realized that I'd felt less than good before. Or maybe I hadn't felt less than good, but it was nice to have someone agree like that. Plenty of people change around until they find what suits them best, he went on, or never settle on one in particular. So, we agree then, I said. I'm E, and you are he, and we're both human, and insist on telling the committee that, no matter what translated law says. We agree. It was nice being with Reet. It had been nice being with the other tinies and littles and smalls, other middles and edges, but that had been when I'd been not safe, precisely, because, looking back, none of us had been safe from each other, but for whatever reason, my Clade, the fact that I was intended to be translated law, the concern of adults around me, I had never felt not safe. Not really. Not until I'd seen that thing under the bushes in the garden, and realized what was coming, and how soon, seeing the reality, the details of what the teachers had spoken of in vague, glowing terms. And then there'd been Sam. I hadn't felt safe since then. I'd been surrounded by enemies, under siege, and I hadn't quite known it. Was it because I hadn't learned the idea of siege until episode 12 of Pirate Exiles? Or was it because Reet had made us our own tiny fortress, here under the bed covers, and not touched me when I didn't want to be touched, didn't look for ways to hurt me, didn't try to squeeze his way closer to me, the way some juveniles did when they wanted something from you? It was new. After all this time of teacher, the schedule, and translated law, maybe it was just that seeing something new made the familiar things look different. I still didn't want to match. I didn't. But I didn't want to die either, and that was my only other choice. And if I had to match, maybe Reet would be not a terrible partner. Maybe it would be all right to be Reet, to be Qven and Reet. I shivered. I didn't ever want to be that horrible thing I'd seen. Qven, said Reet beside me, on the other side of the cushion wall. You all right? No, I said, my voice small. Can I help? I don't think so, I whispered. All right, he said. I have to use the facility, and I'll be right back. He slid out of our nest, and I felt the warmth of him leave, and I wanted to say, come back. But that was foolish. He'd said he'd be right back, and I wasn't some frightened little. I was me, Qven, and I could take care of myself. I had taken care of myself all this time so far, and what could Reet do for me anyway? He'd asked, and I'd told him the truth. There was nothing he could do to help me, except, apparently, just be there. Or be me. The thought produced a shiver of anticipation, both fearful and definitely not. When he came back, he brought a flask of tea and the last of the cakes we'd made that translated law hadn't eaten. I'm back, he said, though of course he was. There was no missing that in this tiny enclosed space. Do you want to watch the next episode? Yes, I said. But before the episode was over, teacher came into the room to tell us that the committee wanted to talk to Reet. The committee was apparently some humans and some not humans sitting next to tables scattered around a plain grey-walled room. Mostly it was humans, and a big, round, black thing with eyes on stalks that sprang out of its back, and a lot of long bending legs. That was a mech I remembered from my lessons back in the edges. It is being operated by a gek somewhere else. And there was a long thing with lots of pairs of legs, and greenish-brown fur, and sharp teeth. Her translated law was already there, of course. When we came in, 3 humans looked up, and one of them made a noise and cried out, "Reet!" and moved towards us. Translated law put themselves in the way. "Stay back," they ordered. Reet pushed his way past the translator. "Mom!" And he threw his arms around the human who'd called his name. Broad-shouldered, brown-skinned, her hair coiled on top of her head. Another of the humans, shorter, but just as broad with hair clipped short, came up and put their arms around both. "Mom, Nana," said Reet, "he should—" He pulled back and looked around at me. "Qven," he said. "Well, all right." I pushed past translated law myself, and Reet gestured me closer. "Mom, Nana, this is Qven. Qven, this is my mom, and my Nana." "Hello, Qven," said Mom, quite politely, but I thought they were hesitant. She was hesitant. Mom was a she word, and Nana was E. "Hello," I said. "It's lovely to meet you." I bowed. "My goodness, what nice manners," said Mom. "I protest," cried translated law behind me. "I have a lot of practice," I said to Mom. "Hello, Nana. It's nice to meet you too. Reet has missed you both." It was the truth. We talked about his family. Nana frowned. "Are you? Have you?" It took me a moment to understand what he was asking. "They want us to," I said. "We've kept to the terms of the committee's order," said translated law, still behind us, still indignant. "We demand that you do the same." "No committee is going to order me to stay away from my son," said Nana, loud and angry. "I'm human too," I said. "I'm E, like Nana is." "Of course you are, dear," said Mom. She sounded like she meant it, even though she'd only just met me. And she seemed to be really looking at me and listening to me. Just me, even though it was all noise and movement around us. "Mix after," said Reet, and a third human came near. A little taller than Nana, not so broad. Her skin was a light brown, her hair almost the same shade, and it was pulled back into a long thick braid. I wondered if I could get my hair to do that. "Mix after," said Reet again. "Thank you so much for all your help, no matter how this comes out." "I just," said Mix after. "I'm sorry about all this. We're all doing what we can," said Mom, smoothly, before Mix after or Reet could say anything else. The black mech had come up behind Nana and Mix after, and now it slid an ice stalk between them. "Mr. Reet, Tweed, you must take your place. You must all take your places." "Over here," said translated law sternly. "No," said Reet. "Over here." He walked toward where Mom and Nana and Mix after had been when we'd come in, beside the gek. I followed. "I protest," said translated law again. "Translator," whistled the gek committee member. "Oh, that's who I assumed was operating the mech. You have assured us that the hatchling retreat has been prevented from doing anything that might be a danger. So have I said, and I'm human too. And it is the GEC who have brought this petition, continued the GEC committee member. It is ordinary for human hatchlings to want to be near their parents. It is ordinary for human parents to be anxious for a hatchling they have not seen in some time. It is you, translator Tla, who make this ordinary thing noisy and confusing and taking up the committee's valuable time. The mech snaked a leg around Reet's elbow and tugged. There will be seats. Come. Everyone settled into places very quickly after that, and Reet and I sat in chairs next to his mom and Nana and Mix after her. All right, said a human who sat beside the greenish-brown Ur. Let's begin. First, I inform you all that only the committee members themselves have authority to rule on this petition. Any others present are either the subjects of the petition or entities bringing information and arguments for the committee's consideration. I looked around to see who those others might be. Everyone seemed to have sorted themselves into little groups. One group around me and Reet, and the mech, who I suppose was the committee member for the GEC. One group around the Ur member. A group of humans, who I suppose were there with the committee member for humans. Translator Tla and another translator, in their own obviously separate place. And last, sitting alone, watching everything with a blank expression, a human in silver and green jacket, kilt and boots, light brown skin and hair cut short. I didn't know who that was. Not everyone is here, said Translator Tla. Translator Tla, said the human with the Ur, if you will refrain from interrupting. Silence. Translator Tla seemed to be actually taken aback. So that there is no confusion, I will introduce the relevant parties. Committee member Agagag for the GEC. The mech made a gesture with one long leg. Committee member. The human made an odd hissing growl. For the The flexed a pair of legs and snapped its teeth together. Committee member Sheris for the humans. One of the human group bowed their head, and committee member Thrill for the Presger. The translator beside translator Tla bowed very shallowly. The committee member for the GEC has brought a petition regarding the treaty status of one Reet fluid. And me, I said, standing. I'm very sorry for interrupting, but I'm human too, and I would like the committee to tell translator Tla so. Committee member Agagag whistled. We had. The mech flicked a leg against my shoulder and looked close at me with one stalked eye. Qven, I said. We had Qven to our petition. I sat back down. Translator Tla looked suddenly as though they'd swallowed something the wrong way. The human with the went on unfazed. We will discuss that shortly. This committee prefers to arrive at consensus on the issues it considers. This is not always possible, but it is always our first aim. To that end, we do our best to investigate contentious issues carefully. The speaker for the committee member looked around, as though they expected to see someone who wasn't there. Then they made a small shrug. Observing, with the right to give evidence and non-binding opinion, is Qven of the Republic of Two Systems. The green and silver-clothed human stood and gave an elegant bow. Ambassador Saymed appears to be late, said the committee member for humans, Sheris. I apologize. No need, said the human. We don't expect to reach any sort of decision today, and she can always send us what information and comment she has. Someone among the aides made a snort, like a suppressed laugh. Sitting beside me, Reet made a small amused noise. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "She's probably been sending them comments non-stop all this time." A door opened behind the committee member for humans, and 3 more humans came into the room. One, tall, very dark-skinned, white-clad, black hair pulled back with a jeweled clip. The other 2, shorter, dressed in colourful long loose shirts and trousers. "Mr. Nakal?" said Reet, quietly. He sounded very, very surprised. "Ambassador Saimet," said the speaker for the committee member for the "We're pleased you could join us." Reet. That was Mutz Aftua, leaning forward to his urgently in Reet's ear. "Reet, that person with Mr. Nakal, what are they even doing here?" asked Reet, still quiet, though I thought Ambassador Saimet heard, and she seemed sourly amused. "But the other person, Reet, that's the person who attacked me." Enae. Committee Chambers, Central Treaty Administration Facility. "Is there some difficulty?" asked the human, and Enae actually stood and opened her mouth to say, "That person who just came in with Ambassador Saimet is someone who attacked me on the Rorosk station." But somewhere, in the back of her mind, a question itched. Why had Ambassador Saimet brought this person, or even Mr. Nadkal, to this meeting? Obviously, she'd never have trouble to do anything of the sort, unless she thought it might be to her advantage. How was it to her advantage? Ambassador Saimet smiled, a small, strangely pleasant smile, which sent a chill down Enae's neck. She did not like to see that. Not at all. "No difficulty. Please excuse me." She sat back down. The ambassador would know, of course, that Mr. Natkal was here with the backing of the siblings of Hikipu. Miss Yedes had declined to add them to the list of evidence givers and declined to endorse any separate petition they might have brought, and wisely so. Enae remembered the things Mr. Natkal had said about Reet's parents, that they didn't really love their children. Ridiculous. Worse than ridiculous, insulting. A disgusting thing to say about anyone, let alone people one hadn't met. So, having been refused by one party in this dispute, they had gone looking for someone else to help them. Not surprising, really, but that Ambassador Saimet would be the one to bring them to this meeting. If anyone had asked Enae before this moment, she would have insisted there was no chance of that ever happening. Enae leaned over to Ms. Yedes and said, as quietly as he could, "Ambassador Saimet must mean to discredit us by claiming we're associated with these people." Ms. Yedes gestured agreement. "You said one of them was the person who attacked you on Rurusk." "Yes." "Don't worry. The committee isn't easily swayed by theatrics. Not generally." Not generally? That didn't make Enae feel better at all. But there was nothing she could do. Not just now. "Qven," said the human. "Deputy Ormat," Enae remembered. Qven, the oddly hunted-looking person who'd come in with Reet, stood. "I'm Qven," he said. "You say you're human. Why do you say this?" "Because I am," said Qven. "Translator Dla had a use for me once, but they don't have any use for me now." "That's not true," Translator Dla interjected. "It's not true, and you know it, Qven." "You told me yourself, Translator," Qven insisted. "Before you found Reet, you were only keeping me around because you didn't want any bad marks on the Clade's record." "But we did find Reet," translator Dla pointed out. Enae thought the translator was trying to keep a sour expression off her face, and remembered Qven saying this was more about internal conflict among the Presger translators than anything the Presger themselves cared about. "And Reet is human," said Qven. "I'm only doing what you asked me to, translator." Enae thought there was a trace of malice in Qven's smooth, courteous manner. "Ms. Qven," began Deputy Ormat. "Mix Qven," Qven corrected him. "I'm a princess." "Mix Qven," Deputy Ormat corrected himself. "I protest," cried Translator Dla. "Translator Dla, you will have your turn to speak," said Deputy Ormat. "For the moment, we are hearing from Mix Qven. You cannot dictate what he says, or suppress parts of our evidence to suit yourself. Be quiet and listen, and you may say what you like when it's your turn to address the committee." Committee member Thrill leaned towards Translator Dla and said something quietly in their ear. Translator Dla frowned thunderously, looked for a moment as though they would say something angry and bitter, and then subsided with a frustrated wave of her white-gloved hands. "Members of the committee," said Qven, in the silence that followed. He had somehow dropped their hunted, haunted look, stood up straighter, and now seemed perfectly confident. He spoke the elegant Ratcha-eye of Ambassador Saymet, of 1,000 adventure villains. "When I reached the edges, I learned that I was destined to become a translator, to work with humans. I studied human matters and human language, but I did not want to become a translator. I did not want to—" The hunted look was back, just for a moment, and then it was gone. "I saw them in the garden, all melted into each other, and all the other edges were standing around, looking at them, so hungry and—" Beside him, Reet stood, put his arm around her shoulders, and said something in her ear that Enae couldn't hear. Qven swallowed, and actually sniffled, but then went on. "I didn't want that. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be that. I tried to run away, but I was injured." Qven's voice steadied, regained its strength. Translator Dla was very angry. I was supposed to be part of them, but now I was unsuitable, and they didn't know what to do with me. They would have disposed of me if it wouldn't have made them look bad. They didn't know what to do with me at all. But then they found Reet, and they said that Reet and I would make an adult, and they don't even know what to do with the adult we would be. Translator Dla told us so yesterday. Translator Dla made a short, sharp noise, and Deputy Ormat looked at them, but they were silent. "The translator said," Qven continued, "that if Reet would give up his petition and tell the committee that he wasn't really human after all, Translator Dla would find some place for us. But if Reet insisted on continuing to claim that he was human, then if the committee didn't decide in his favor, we would both be disposed of." A gasp from Istvetluid and a muffled oath from Etchimin. Miss Yedes put a restraining hand in front of them both. "Look at the she whispered. "Look at Deputy Ormat." The furry snake-like committee member had gone rigid, its fur standing out like spikes. Was it really fur? Deputy Ormat's expression was impassive, but their face had gone dark, flushed with some emotion. Qven continued. "So you see, members of the committee, Translator Dla herself wants me to make an adult with Reet, but they have no use for that adult. They have no use for either of us. we don't really belong there. But Reet is human. He has parents and friends who are human. And if we were to make an adult, it would only make sense that that adult would be human. Deputy Ormat looked at committee member Shrill. Do I understand correctly, said Deputy Ormat, that Presger translated juveniles are obliged to merge somehow with another juvenile to make up an adult, or they die? That's correct, Deputy, came the reply. And you intend that Reet should merge with Mix Qven here? That has been our intention since we were informed of Reet's existence, said committee member Shrill. That's Mr. Tweed to you, growled Edgemont Fluid. So, concluded Deputy Ormat, ignoring him, when we're discussing the future of Reet Fluid, we are by necessity also discussing the future of Mix Qven. Yes? I would say that's obvious. Silence. I know that the members for humans and the member for the Presger translators might like to slice this question as fine as they can, but it would be wasting this committee's time. Whether or not Mix Qven is human at the moment, whether or not E is added to the petition, our fate will, as I understand it, be as much determined by our decision as Mr. Fluid's will, even if he does not ultimately join Mr. Fluid to make an adult. Yes? The various committee members gestured assent, even Shrill, with visible reluctance. Very well then. Mix Qven is added to the petition. Next, we've had meetings with and messages from every concerned party, except you, Mr. Fluid. I wasn't aware that I could speak to the committee, Reet said. It would be negligent of us to decide your fate without hearing from you on the matter, said Deputy Ormat. He cast a glance, tight-lipped, at translators Dla and Shrill, and then lifted a beckoning hand to Reet. Speak. Reet rose. Members of the committee, he said, and paused, as though Enae thought he didn't know quite what to say next. The room was silent, everyone looking at Reet, as if there was some question, some suspense about what he might say next. These are my parents. He shifted his head backward just a bit, indicating Istfair and Edgemont Fluid. This is my mom and my nana, and my maman is back in Zeosen, I guess. Istfair made an acknowledging noise. I have siblings. I'm not their only child. So, you're telling the committee, said Deputy Ormat, that the Fluids are your family? Yes, said Reet. They are not. Enae thought he might not complete that thought aloud. He hesitated so long. But then he went on. They're not perfect. My nana can be difficult sometimes. But they've always been there for me when I needed them. Even Nana, especially Nana, sometimes. Behind Enae, Edgemon made a soft, choking sound. She was afraid to turn around to see what expression he had on her face. They are my parents. Wherever I came from, whoever left me on that ship, they left me. And it was Maman and Mom and Nana who stepped up and took care of me. And maybe I've never quite felt like I fit in. Reet shrugged. I always did feel wrong, like I didn't belong anywhere, until. He stopped. But my parents always looked for ways for me and my sibs to find where we'd come from. It's just, I never found out until now, but that doesn't change the fact that my parents have been my parents for 30 years. They are here now, and I thought he was going to say, when they didn't have to be, but apparently he couldn't say that out loud, or he'd changed his mind. I don't know. I guess translated law here recognizes my DNA, and Qven has told me about growing up as a Presger translated juvenile, and I'm sure they're right about that. I'm sure that's what I am, if you look at my genetics. But I grew up human. I have a family. And one day I was just yanked out of my bed and dragged off and brought here, and it's not right. I mean, couldn't you have just talked to me and told me what was going on? And why do I have to choose one or the other? I have said who found their biological relatives, and those are family to them, but our parents are still their parents too. He shrugged again. I don't know. I don't really know what's going on here, or why. Enae thought that if Reet had set out to play to the feelings of the committee member, he couldn't have made a better speech. The with the unpronounceable name, still sat rigid, its spiky fur smoothed again. Deputy Ormat's presumably angry flush had returned. Translated La said, into the silence that followed Reet's words, Presger translators, as you call us, do not have families. We do not have parents. We have only the treaty. It is the reason for our existence. It's not the reason for my existence, Reet retorted. What do you call them? My progenitor produced me and then abandoned me. But they left you too, didn't they? And they left me. And now I'm supposed to just go away with you and do whatever you want and never see my family again? There is such a thing as duty, Ambassador Saymet said. And in my experience, most parents understand that sometimes choices must be made that one's children do not like or understand, but that will in the end be best for them and for those around them. The committee member began to hiss very, very quietly. Yes, yes, said the committee member for the GEC. Duty, duty. We understand duty. We understand the things one must do so that life continues rightly in the world. But here is an argument, yes. Even among humans, even among Presger translators. What is that duty? How are we knowing that duty? Reet has a duty to his parents, and they a duty to their hatchlings among humans. And if this were a matter of, is Reet a Gek, or is he a human, there would be no difficulties. There are none in the case brought several years ago. That person who is Gek does still have friends and associates who are human, and he travels in the world and outside it as he wishes. There is no difficulty about this. Why is there difficulty now? I tell you. The Get Committee member gestured with two legs, and stalked eyes stood up straight. I tell you. It is the Presger translators, and yes, the Rajai humans who wish to keep secrets. Through mystery and threats of danger, the Rajai keep their hold on power among humans. Through mystery and threats of danger, the Presger translators keep us all wary of them. And I do not say we should not be wary of them, but I say we all know each other here. We, the Gek, know how humans are, and humans know how we are. The know what humans know of us, and we know what we care to of them. The intelligences. It gestured toward Qven, sitting silent, with the faintest trace of a smirk on its face. They do not hide themselves. Qven nodded an acknowledgement. The committee member for the GEC continued. It is time for you to not hide yourselves. These hatchlings will be an adult, and humans will learn about how Presger translators are. And you do not wish this, but it must happen. These hatchlings will be an adult, and it will not be for the Rak'tai to dictate who will learn these things. Qven said, I would like to speak in support of the committee member for the GEC. He makes a very good point, and a point moreover that is more and more relevant as the treaty participants consider the possible admission of my own people. Let me speak frankly. The admission of AIs to the treaty is a direct threat to Rak'tai power, a power which the usurper holds to with increasing desperation as she fights against herself. If the usurper loses her hold over even a fraction of the ships and stations in her territory that possess AI, if her territory dissolves into provinces and systems at war with each other, or turned inward to their own concerns, what does she have left? Only the secrecy surrounding the Presger and their translators. Only the threat of what might happen if we do not follow her advice, her instructions, her policy. And no doubt, translated laws, power, and status among their own people depend on this same state of affairs. Oh, cried translated law, rising abruptly, sending their chairs scudding backward. You don't understand. Listen to me. If Reet is allowed to leave here, with or without Qven, and go back among humans, they will be a danger to everyone they meet. And what if they have offspring? You will have to explain more clearly why this is a danger, said Deputy Ormat. Look, said translated La. Listen. Maybe, yes. It seems that Reet has exercised astonishing and admirable self-control and hurt no one during a time a juvenile would be expected to have done a great deal of damage let loose among humans. But I do not expect any other such juveniles to be able to exercise the same self-control. It's just not how juveniles are. And furthermore, the treaty depends on them understanding things a particular way. And I can't explain it to you. It only makes sense to them. The treaty, as we see it, and what they consider to be happening here, are not quite the same thing, and you must believe me when I tell you that if Reet is allowed to leave here and call themselves human, it will quite possibly be the end of the treaty itself. Reet. Committee Chambers, Central Treaty Administration Facility. Translated La's declaration was met with a long, resounding silence. Reet thought he could feel the dread and tension crackling in the air. And then Deputy Ormat said, Translated La, we are following procedures laid down during the last renegotiation of the treaty. And if those procedures are potentially treaty violating in themselves, that is a serious concern. Of course, we are all aware that this is, as you have pointed out, more than just a matter of one juvenile petitioning for human status. Two, he corrected, as though he expected a protest from Qven. One, insisted translated La. Reet, sitting beside Qven, was astonished at their vehemence. Bad enough if they match before they leave here for human space. If they don't, each juvenile will match with some human. They must, they have no choice. Then they reproduce. They shouldn't be able to, but obviously our fugitive managed it. Translated law gestured at Reet, and those offspring met with some human, and so on, and I assure you that is not the only danger they pose. There is a reason we do not all wander freely among humans ourselves. Only those of us who are carefully trained are allowed to do so. You may think that one exception can hardly pose any danger, but I assure you, you would be wrong. And how long will it be before some juvenile with human treaty status, running loose the way human juveniles do, breaks the treaty all on their own by attacking some or geck, or even a machine? I sincerely give the juvenile Reet all my admiration. I assure you, there is not another juvenile of ours who would have restrained themselves so well for so long. Qven, yeah? Translated La pointed. A very rude gesture among Redja'i, Reet knew. Qven ate or vivisected countless other juveniles. Beside Reet, Qven frowned and looked up into some distance. 1, he whispered. 2, 3, 4. Qven said, So, you say yourself that Reet did not behave like a Presger translator juvenile. She behaved, in fact, more or less indistinguishably from a human one. That's not what I said, translated La snapped. 15, 16, muttered Qven. May I ask, began Ambassador Saymet, rising, to clarify a few issues? Deputy Ormat nodded at the ambassador, and she said with a shallow bow in return, We are all agreed, are we not, that keeping the treaty intact is of the utmost importance for all of us here? Nods, murmurs of agreement. 27, said Qven, so quietly that Reet was sure only he could hear. 28, Ambassador Saymet said. And we all accept, I hope, that translated law and the rest of their kind are deeply concerned about preserving that treaty. 34, announced Qven, though I might have missed a few from when I was a tiny. I don't remember that time very well, but I didn't have many teeth then. Qven rolled its eyes. That's not even close to countless. I've killed more humans than that in a single day. I don't want to kill any humans, said Qven. I don't want to break the treaty. So, continued Ambassador Saymet, striving mightily to seem as though she hadn't been interrupted, we all agree on the importance of the treaty, and the danger posed not just to humans, but to all of our species here, if the treaty is voided. Yes? More murmurs of assent from the various committee members. Then, let me show you some of Reet Llwyd's associates. Istra and Edgemont Llwyd, as you see, are good people, clearly excellent parents. But who are Reet's friends? Mortified, Reet couldn't help making a tiny frustrated noise. Members of the committee, I introduce to you friends so dedicated to Reet Llwyd that they have gone to great trouble and expense to travel here, in the hope that they would have an opportunity to speak to the committee for him. She waved to Hikipi to stand. Heroth Nadkal, president of an organization called the Siblings of Hikipu. There was a small squeak of protest from the committee member for humans. Apparently she knew something about the Hikipi. Saymet continued. For those committee members who don't recognize the name, those of us representing humans to the treaty, are plagued by a constant stream of communications, rants, manifestos, even threats from various human factions who believe against all evidence that the Presger do not exist, that they are a hoax perpetrated by the Rajai. No few of those come from Hikipi. Beside the ambassador, Mr. Nat Carl frowned, and this, Ambassador Saymet turned to the other person, is Enae Ismore, a Hikipi nationalist closely connected to the siblings of Hikipu. Reet was himself a member of that organization for some months, studied the Hikipi language, and escorted Hikipi activists during their visit to Zeosen system. They came to me, said Reet. He could feel himself flushing with anger, and for some reason, humiliation. They said my DNA proved that I was a Hikipi. Eshan, interjected Mr. Nadkal, no longer able to control the indignation that was clear in his expression. No just Yikipi, but the lost scion of our ancient rulers. I never knew where I had come from, said Reet. I never belonged anywhere. They claimed I belonged to them. I wasn't sure I believed them, but I thought it was worth looking into. And I didn't escort Hikipi activists. I had a job with foreign affairs, showing important visitors around. I was assigned to Aftua too. He gestured toward her. That's how she found me. He sighed, and I don't know all of what Mr. Nadkal might be involved in, but the siblings of Hikipo, most of them, don't really do anything except have meetings where they sing some old songs and have snacks, and maybe learn a little Hikipi. And get each other jobs in foreign affairs, Ambassador Saymet pointed out. And that is the issue of the attack on Mix-Aftua by Ms. Ismore here. She gestured toward Mix-Aftua's attacker. That was a misunderstanding, said Mr. Natkal, though maybe not such a misunderstanding as all that, all things considered. Do, by all means, explain yourself, said Ambassador Saymet, with just the slightest sneer of triumph. Ambassador Saymet, said Deputy Ormat severely, we have nothing to say about human factional disputes. Factional disputes? Asked Mr. Nadkal, voice incredulous, expression indignant. Factional disputes? Millions of Hikipi have died, murdered by the Fen, shot, starved, shoved by the hundreds out airlocks. Those who survive have been forbidden to speak our language or practice our religion. This is no factional dispute. Regardless, replied Deputy Ormat, this is an issue with which this committee is not concerned. That is not true. It is absolutely not true, cried Mr. Natkal. I demand a chance to speak. Everyone else here has been able to speak. Speak, then, said Deputy Ormat, after a moment's tense consideration. And when you are done speaking, you will leave this room. You will not be readmitted. Mr. Natkal looked somehow both bitter and triumphant at that. Here's how it is, he said. Here's the truth. There's no such thing as a Presger. You all, he gestured to the committee members around, you know it. You have to know it. The machine, he gestured to Sven, sitting dead-faced in its seat. It must know too. All those recordings of the Presger supposedly tearing ships apart, they are not real. They are made up. They are made up by the Rajai to control the rest of humanity with a fear of what the Presger might supposedly do. Has anyone here ever seen an actual Presger? He looked around accusingly. No one said a word. I didn't think so. I have, said translated La, and so has Ambassador Saymet. You have no idea what you're talking about. Mr. Nadkal scoffed. Oh, of course you have, but you're part of the lie. The machine there already said it. You use fear of the mysterious aliens to keep power, as so do the Fen. I assure you, Heroth Nadkal, said translated La, I know nothing about the Fen, and none of us has ever had anything to do with them. So you see, replied Mr. Nadkal. But if that's true, then what about Reet Shan? He pointed emphatically, triumphantly at Reet. I've seen his DNA. He's human. And you are sitting here claiming he's some kind of alien hybrid. It's a lie. It's all a lie. There are no Presger. All you so-called Presger translators are no more than humans pretending to be something more, something else. You are so very wrong. Translated La said softly. Prove it then, said Mr. Nadkal. You can't, can you? Translated La smiled, a small, tight expression. Then they picked up a tea bowl from the table nearest them, smashed it back down, swept the fragments into one hand, poured them into their mouth, and swallowed them. Mr. Nadkal scoffed. Street magic, or an engineered digestive system. Translated La smiled again, unhinged their jaw, and vomited up the tea bowl, whole and undamaged. Very good, said Mr. Nadkal contemptuously. You must have practiced that a lot. I would like the committee to recognize, said Ambassador Saymat calmly, as though none of this, what Mr. Nadkal had said, what translated La had done, was even remotely out of the ordinary, that these are the human associates of Reet Fluid. This is who she would be returning to, if you allow her back into human space. She, said Qven. Reet's she, and I'm he. Ambassador Saymet didn't even look in their direction. You can see, I hope, Deputy, members of the committee, that this might be particularly dangerous. These are people who will stop at nothing to void the treaty. Ambassador, said Deputy Ormat, I am personally insulted that you felt the need to bring this to our attention in such a melodramatic and frankly patronizing way. You might merely have reported the facts. We were never going to make our determination without as much of the relevant information as possible, which you know well enough. Ambassador Saymet said, I only wanted to be sure that everyone here understood the seriousness of the situation. Do you think we play? Asked the committee member for the GEC. Do you think no one but you does important work? Do you think no one but you cares about the treaty? I think, replied Ambassador Saymet, that the GEC in particular care for the integrity of the treaty only insofar as it affects the interests of the GEC, that the have an old score to settle with the Rajai, who have been the human face of the treaty signatories for centuries. I think that even the committee member for humans has been listening to advisers with anti-Rajai agendas. Indignant hisses sounded from the knot of people behind committee member Sheriff. 200 years ago, I would have been quite confident that any threat posed by extremists like these, she gestured toward Mr. Nutkal and Mix Avtua's attacker, would be easily dealt with. I don't say I would have been in favor of the committee giving Reet Freud human status. I would not, but the dangers would not have been so great. You speak of human factional disputes as though they mean nothing here, but I assure you, they are quite important in this particular situation. You can imagine, I'm sure, what might happen if enough people such as these decided to deliberately break the treaty in the most outrageous and violent way in an attempt to prove that their delusions were truth. Well, now, Ambassador Seimet, said the committee member for the GEC, which is your argument? That Reet, Treat, and young Qven, the GEC waved a long black leg, will eat humans, or that they will somehow encourage a breaking of the treaty, which, if they are human, would be an attack on non-human treaty signatories. What she is saying is, said Mr. Nutkal, loud and now belligerent, that the rat has been manipulating things to keep their hold over the treaty for centuries. She's as much as admitted it. Ambassador Seimet scoffed. So long as they don't threaten the treaty, we don't really care what the Fen do. Or anyone else, for that matter. She admits it, cried Mr. Nutkal, pointing at Ambassador Seimet, who did not react to Nutkal's rudeness. And the rest of it is true too. You all must know it. Deputy Ormat snapped. Mr. Nutkal, calm yourself, or I will have security remove you, and you, Ambassador. I'm surprised and dismayed at your behavior today. I will be asking the committee to consider censuring you. Even without weapons, these people are a danger to those who live and work on this facility, a danger to the treaty by your own admission, and you have brought them here yourself. I'm quite able to keep things under control, said Ambassador Seimet, seemingly unconcerned. You needn't worry. But do as you must. Furthermore, said Deputy Ormat, as though Ambassador Seimet hadn't spoken, Mr. Nutkal and Ms. Ismore are to leave this facility within the hour, and leave the system within 24 hours after that. They will not be allowed to return. Concur, said the committee member for humans, and the member for the GEC, and even the member for the Presger echoed her. Deputy Ormat said then, Ambassador, if you have any other information to communicate to this committee on this matter, you can send us a report. There is no need for you to attend any further meetings in person. Goodbye. Mr. Nutkal gave an inarticulate cry and made as if to strike Ambassador Seimet. The ambassador moved quickly, in a way Reet couldn't quite make sense of, and Mr. Nutkal, who suddenly bent over, whimpering, Ambassador Seimet holding his wrists behind his back. Whoa, said Qven. Don't fuck with Ambassador Seimet. Someone here has some common sense, said Ambassador Seimet. Alert, said a calm, impersonal voice from the ceiling. This is not a drill. Imminent hull breach, possible, station-wide, shelter in place. Alert, this is not. That ship, whispered the GEC committee member behind Reet. That ship of the siblings of Hikipu. It makes threats. The captain makes demands and says if they are not met, the ship will be exploded. It is near enough this station that such an explosion will do damage and kill or injure many, near enough that attempting to destroy it will damage the station as well. What demands? asked Reet. Everyone else seemed distracted, consulting implants or handhelds. And then, Ms. Ismore ran across the space that separated the ambassador's party from the Presger translators, pulled something long and gleaming from her shirt, shouted, "Death to the Fen oppressors!" and stabbed translator Dla in the neck. Qven. Committee Chambers, Central Treaty Administration Facility. All this time, I'd been mostly paying attention to what everyone was saying or doing, though at the back of everything I could feel vaguely the doors and corridors that led into and out of the room. Not the ones that the humans had used coming in, but the ones that whispered and sang to me, the ones I could feel. I hadn't paid much attention to them, because there was so much else going on that was so much more important. But now those doors and corridors screamed all together, and there was a horrible, indescribable sense of dislocation, and then the lights went out, and there was no up and down anymore. Mom and Nana and Mix Arthur cried out. Lights came on again, dimmer. I looked around and saw Reet's parents were flailing. Mix Arthur grabbed hold of a chair, but the chair wasn't sitting on the floor anymore. And the more she moved, the farther it moved away from the floor, or whatever it was now. There was no way to tell any direction from another. Mom was holding on to Nana, whose eyes were firmly closed. Reet had grabbed my arm and floated beside me, his hair sticking every which way off his head. And the room was different in other ways. It was, for instance, smaller. Much smaller. Translator Dla was gone. The and human committee members and their entourages, gone. Ambassador Seimet and the 2 humans she had brought, gone. Committee member Agagek's mech was still there, but it was half in, half out with the wall behind it, legs twitching. No one else was in the room. What the hell? That was Reet. What did they do? There was a door, a visible human kind of door, beside where committee member Agagek's mech twitched fitfully. "We can get to the door," said Mix Arthur, somewhat breathlessly. "I can push off the chair and—" "Don't," cried Mum, and she must have tightened her grip on Nana, because he made a small sound of protest. "The indicator says there's air on the other side," argued Mix Arthur, "and no fire. We need to get out of here." "There's nothing on the other side of that door," I told her. "Not even vacuum." "What happened?" asked Nana. "What's going on?" I said, "Translator Clade did something to the doors. Not the doors you can see. I mean the doors we use." The doors they used, I supposed. Reet and I drifted, somewhat pleasantly, I thought, except for the fact that we didn't know exactly what had happened or how to get out to fear. "I'm going to be sick," said Nana. "Where is everyone else?" asked Mix Arthur. "I don't know," I confessed. "They must have been on the other side of whatever there was, a pathway or some kind of line. There are doors here, but they don't lead anywhere." "What do you mean?" asked Mom. "What do you mean there are doors here? There's only one door that I can see." "There are 3 more," I told her. "They're the kind of doors that adults use. They think I can't feel them, but I can." I probably shouldn't have admitted that, but this was Mom and Nana, right? And Reet's friend. But I don't know what's on the other side. It all feels strange. Usually, I could sense hallways and rooms beyond the doors, but here everything was muffled and indefinite. It's not nothing like that other door, though. "Can you open them?" asked Nana. "I wouldn't assume there was air on the other side," Reet cautioned, and I agreed with him. "We should probably just wait here. They'll send someone out to look for us if they can." "If they can," repeated Nana, eyes still shut. "We'll run out of air before anyone gets here." "Hush, Edgerman," said Mom. Reet said, "There has to be some kind of emergency equipment here. There always is on a station." How is it marked here? Orange, said Mix F2 quickly. It's always an orange sign or an orange tab or a switch. That's what they said at the orientation when we first got here. I see orange, I said, and pointed to where one of the mech's stalked eyes emerged from the wall. Good, said Mom. Well spotted. And after some manoeuvring with the chair, Mix F2 managed to reach the orange spot and pulled something. A panel came away with a click. Mix F2 set it aside. It sat in the air beside her, spinning, drifting just slightly, and pulled out a small orange package. There are 3 more in here, she said. No, wait, 2.5 more. So it looks like we have 3 of whatever these are. The print on the orange wrapping said, Emergency Enclosure. That emergency enclosures, I said, in case he couldn't read it. Do you know how to use them? Asked Mom. No, I confessed. There are instructions, said Mix Aftua, and they were in the orientation. You unfold it and get inside and pull a tab and it pressurizes. There should be air for about a day. It's got a beacon on it too. All right, said Reet, sounding as though he was trying very hard to seem calm and untroubled. The enclosures hold 4 people each, so we have 3 days of air for 4 people. There are 5 of us, Mix Aftua pointed out. Nana gave a small, sickly laugh. It's like one of those puzzles your tutor gives you. Only the price for getting it right is not dying. We shouldn't open these yet anyway, said Mix Aftua. There's still air in the room. We'll just have to be on the lookout for signs of... She trailed off. I think I should go through a door, I said. No, snapped Mom, and then in a more reasonable tone, we should stay together. We should wait here for someone to find us. How is anyone going to find us? Asked Nana, an unsettling edge in her voice. We could be anywhere or nowhere. We might not even be in our universe. I don't know where we are, I said, but I'm the one who can open the doors, and there's only air for 4 people anyway. You might die, said Mom. It's better to stay here. We all might die, I pointed out. I didn't want to die, but I definitely wanted to get out of here, and I might not be able to even open a door. But I think I can, and maybe I can find something that will help. Stop, said Mom. Let's think. We have some time to think. Oh, there's so much air to breathe though, said Nana. Hush, said Mom. Qven, said Mix Arthur, still holding the emergency enclosure. What did you mean when you said there wasn't even vacuum on the other side of that door? What I said. There's nothing there. Not even space. I could feel the nothing pressing all around us, except for where the other doors led to something. Translated law must have moved us somehow, or I don't know. The attack breached the treaty, though, said Reet. He hadn't let go of me all this time, didn't it? I don't know, I admitted. It might have, or it might not have. Translated law would definitely have preferred it not to get to that point. So, said Reet, when that person attacked, Translated law might have realized that there were people on the station who were here specifically to do that, to violate the treaty, that there was a ship in the system not far from Central, with who knows how many people in it who were not just willing but eager to violate the treaty, had just threatened to. So they did something to prevent that. I think killing us breaks a treaty, said Nana. I'm pretty sure of that. It might not, said Mix Aftua. Mix Aftua is right, I said. It might not. It's complicated, but it's just better not to have complicated things happen. I don't think this is what translated law meant to happen. I think they were doing something else, and it went wrong somehow. Well, they did get stabbed, said Reet, or it looked like it. It was hard to tell, really, because that's when everything went wrong. Yes, exactly, I said. They were doing something, and they got interrupted when they were stabbed. I think that's what happened. So, they were moving the universe around? Asked Mom, for the first time a note of fear in her voice. Not really, I said, though I knew I couldn't explain it, not even the parts of it that I understood. But, kind of. So they can move the universe around? Said Mix-Astua. Just translated law, or all the Presger translators? Kind of. All of us? I admitted, but not me. I'm only a juvenile and I hardly have any training in that. There are adults who that's what they do though. Translated law said that. That was the job they offered us. Reet told them if we'd agree to drop our petition, maintaining some sort of network of pathways, but they couldn't explain it to me. Then there is a way out of here through those doors, said Mom. We just don't know where it goes. Yes, I agreed. And we don't know if there's air there, suggested Mix-Astua. Right, I said. Well, let's go then, said Reet. No, he said, cutting across Mom and Nana's protests. I can't stay here without Qven. Neither of you are going anywhere, said Mom firmly. If those pathways or whatever they are lead anywhere, someone will come. Find us. If they can, Reet pointed out. And how long will it take them? We have no way to know. He looked at me, as if for confirmation. I don't know, I said. I don't know anything. I thought I should tell him to stay here with his parents, but I found that I kind of wanted him to come with me. If I left Reet behind, who knew if I'd ever see him again? But if Reet stays here, said Mix-Astua, and whatever it is that's keeping him from merging with someone else wears off, what will happen then? I didn't think it was wearing off any time soon, but he had a point. I'm going anyway. If it lets the air out, you can all get into your emergency enclosure. Silence. Mix-Astua floated, spinning slowly, frowning at the emergency enclosure instructions. Mom was making a face I didn't understand. Distress and something else. You're an adult, Reet. No, I know. Interrupted me before I could contradict her. I know he's still a juvenile, but as a human, he's grown up. So, Reet, you can do what you want to do. But I want you to understand. Maybe you don't really, but I would do anything to keep you safe. Qven, too. You are eventually going to be the same person, right? So, if there's only space for 4 in the enclosure, I'll stay out here. Don't be ridiculous, said Nana irritably. I will. This isn't convincing me to stay, said Reet. I felt very strange. Not just the weightlessness, which was odd, though pleasant. Not the fear that we might never leave this tiny room, that we might die here. Though that was part of what I was feeling. No, it was Mom and Nana. Rita told me about growing up, but I guess I never really thought about exactly what all that would mean. What it was like to have a mom and a Nana and a maman. Certainly, I'd never imagined what it would be like to have anyone in the world say they would die to keep me alive. "You've only just met me," I said. "There's no point being dramatic," said Mix-Astua, looking away from the orange enclosure packet and toward us. We have 3 enclosures, so there's air for all of us for at least 2 days, nearly anyway, and we can stay by an enclosure while Qven opens one of these doors he says is here, and if there's a pressure drop we can all get in and work out the next steps after that. Silence. In a way, Mix Aftua was reminding me of teacher. It's a good plan, said Reet. If there's air through one of these doors, then everything will be fine. We'll find a way to get help. I don't like it, grumbled Nana. Yes, well, said Reet. You didn't pay attention during the safety lectures either, did you? It's a good thing Mix Aftua did. The safety lecture said to stay and wait for help if anything happened, Mom pointed out. Reet waved that away. I'm going with Qven. We'll find help. There was a little more argument, but it was half-hearted, I thought. In the end, Mom, Nana, and Mix Aftua gathered around the emergency enclosure Mix Aftua held, and Reet and I floated to where I was sure there was a door, one that sort of, maybe, felt like there would be air and space to exist beyond. Ready? Called Miss Aftua. I felt the door, tried to do what I'd felt teacher do. Missed, tried again. The door opened. Behind me, I heard Mom make a surprised, distressed noise. I felt air blow past, out of the dimly lit space before me, and into the much reduced room behind. Just a small breeze. Should we leave it open? I asked. There's lots of air here. Yes, said Mix Aftua. We'll stay by the enclosures, just in case. Reed, be careful, said Mom. Don't worry, Mom, said Reet, and he grabbed one side of the door and pushed us through. Enae. Somewhere. They waited, hanging in silence for several moments after Reet and Qven pushed off through the door that Qven had somehow made, or found. Enae didn't know. It didn't matter. We should stay close, she said, trying to sound brisk. Etchemin was curled into a fetal position, floating, and Istva gripped her arm. Was there something Enae could push against to bring herself near them? If there's an emergency, and suddenly she had to suppress an inappropriate giggle at the thought. If there's an emergency. If there's an emergency, we all need to be able to get into the enclosure as quickly as possible. The deputy for the Gex mech twitched again, legs scrabbling against the wall. It gave Enae a stab of guilt? Distress, anyway. Oh, sacred bones, I'm going to be sick, moaned Etchemin. No, you aren't, Enae said, getting closer to the matter-of-fact, business-like tone she'd been aiming for. We should have had that Qven close the door, said Etchemin after a while. We don't know that, said Mom firmly. We've got the enclosures if anything happens, said Enae. We'll be fine. Sure, groused Etchemin. If by fine you mean trapped forever in a weird dimension where no one can ever find us. That's not helpful, Nin, said Istver. We'll be fine, said Enae, not wanting any arguments. We have air. I have some water in my bag. So do I, said Istver. Enae nodded, and then wished she hadn't. It felt very strange to be nodding with no gravity. We have air and water, and we can go days without food, even if we won't enjoy that. And they'll be looking for us. The Presger did this, or translator Clade did. Either way, they'll fix it and come get us. Maybe. She hoped. But there was no point in thinking about that, in wondering what would happen if no one came looking for them, if no one could. If that happened, they would find out soon enough. No need to speculate. We just have to be patient. Qven said, when you left home, makes us tour, did you ever think you'd end up like this? No, I never did, said Enae, as brightly as he could manage. It's been an adventure, there's no question about that. The mech in the wall scrabbled again, and Enae tried to ignore it. She closed her eyes, found it didn't help in the least, and opened them again. The mech arms spasmed, and it made a small noise. It was alive, wasn't it? Sort of. The Gek ambassador had called it a biomech. It didn't have anything you'd call a mind, supposedly, but Enae shuddered, thinking about it. Did it hurt? Surely it did. Even if it didn't have much of a brain, it had to be unpleasant, at the very least, to be trapped in the wall like that. What if that had happened to one of them, to Istver or Qven or to Reet or Qven or to Enae herself? What if it had happened to someone she didn't know, someone who had been in the committee room or even somewhere else on the facility? What if whatever translator Dla had done wasn't finished, and whatever it was happened again? She did her best to swallow, but her mouth was dry, and her throat didn't seem to be working right. She tried to remember what she'd done all the years at grandmaman, when she'd been upset, hurt, angry, despairing, afraid. But she couldn't find it, whatever that resource had been, that he hadn't even realized he'd had, until now. They were going to die. No, they weren't. Maybe someone would come. Maybe Reet and Qven would find something, someone, and come back for them. He shouldn't come back, said Qven, as though he had been hearing Enae's thoughts. Enae, shocked, expected Istver to say something like, hush, or not helpful, Min. But she said nothing. He should get as far away from here as he can, continued Qven. Him and that Qven. He's a little odd, but then so is Reet, and Reet seemed to like him. He seemed to like Reet, said Istver. They need to get away, said Qven. No wonder Reet's progenitor ran away. No, Min, said Istver. We don't know all the circumstances. I don't care, groused Qven. It don't. His paws are children you have no use for. I'll threaten them with it if they don't do what you want. Reet won't leave you, Enae said, or tried to say. She swallowed and tried again. Reet won't leave you. You're his parents. You came all this way to help him. He wouldn't leave you behind. Children leave parents behind, said Istver. It's what they're supposed to do, one way or another. Yes, but Enae stopped. Had to think about that. It felt so backward to her own experience of parents. Children leave parents behind. She guessed it was true, or often true, but he might not, said Qven. He might not, but he should. Are you hoping that he does? Asked Enae, feeling panicked, more panicked than she had been, but she wasn't sure why. I don't know, said Istver, as though she and Qven were in complete agreement on this, as though she could speak for herself and them both, and Qven didn't interrupt or contradict. I don't want to be trapped here, and I don't want us to be trapped here, but I also want my son to be free to live his life. We came all this way for that. The mech in the wall twitched again and made an unsettling, gurgling noise. He won't just walk away, said Enae. If they find someone, some way out, they'll come back for us, or send help. Even if they find a way to escape, Reet won't forget about us or just leave us here. He should, though, said Qven again. We'll figure something out, said Istver reassuringly, though Enae thought there was a note of desperation in her voice. This would be quite a story to tell when you get home, Mix of tour. When you get home. Would they get home? Would any of them? Would anyone ever find them, even after they died? Or would their corpses float here, decaying in this one room, surrounded by not even nothing until the end of time? She would not be sick. She would not. Children leave parents behind. But Enae's mother had left her behind. Maybe she hadn't meant to. No, Ellie was sure her mother hadn't meant to leave her behind. But sometimes things happened that you couldn't control. That didn't change the fact, though. Her mother had gone, irrevocably, and small Enae had been alone, bundled off to grandmaman while she was still trying to understand what had happened. Enae's mother had left grandmaman, for very good reasons Enae knew very personally, without anyone ever having to explain to her. But grandmaman didn't have to raise Enae herself, could have sent her away to some creche, could have refused to acknowledge Enae as family, anything at all. Instead, she'd taken Enae in, and never let me leave. She was not going to cry. She was not. And after all, what sort of person was she, to be so ungrateful to the woman who had taken her in, who had, in the end, made sure she was cared for? The sort of person who had resented grandmaman as much as she had loved her, from the moment she had come to After House. Ungrateful, disloyal, selfish. And it turned out grandmaman had been right to insist she stay at home. After all, once Enae had been free to do as she liked, she'd come here. She had left After House and headed straight to her own death, and there was no one she was leaving behind. No one who would care that she was gone. Grandmaman might have. No, grandmaman would have. Grandmaman had made sure that Enae would be provided for when she died, out of every other After in existence. Grandmaman had cared for Enae in her own, not entirely healthy way. But there had been no one else. That's largely grandmaman's doing, whispered some traitorous voice in the back of Enae's thoughts. But no, it couldn't be all grandmaman's fault. Grandmaman had done the best she could, hadn't she? And once grandmaman had gone, and Enae had had the chance to make a friend, what had happened? Enae hadn't had any more messages from Qven since he'd sent in the report of what had happened in Caroxane. Whatever she had done, whatever she had said, it was apparently too much for Qven to still feel friendly toward Enae, and Enae hadn't even noticed it. Until now. There was something wrong with her. It would have been nice to have a friend. Someone who had cared if she existed, or not. Next after, said Istver. Enae, are you all right? No, she wanted to say. Tears clung in blobs to her eyelashes. She swallowed. Just thinking. It almost sounded like her normal voice, but not quite. Don't do that, said Etchemin, not unless you're thinking about some way to get out of here. Or get a message to someone outside, said Istver. The mech in the wall gurgled again and thrashed its legs. And she found it then, that thing, whatever it was, that had gotten here through the worst times in the past, or at least she saw the edges of it. Oh! She wiped her eyes on the hem of his shirt. How do the Gek control the mechs? They do it from very far away, don't they? I mean... She trailed off. It was a ridiculous idea, but it didn't matter because what other options did they have? Maybe we can use it to get a message out, or maybe... She almost didn't dare say it. Maybe the committee member is trying to talk to us. It didn't matter how likely that was, or even if it was possible. Here, let's see if we can get over that side of the room and take a look at the mech.